I'd like to also tell them that on the other side we have the team from Vietnam, and we have Dr. Lam Huang, who is in charge, and also supported today by MS Hong, who is our coordinator for the day. So thank you very much. I think at this point I would like to probably let Lam say something if you have something to say, and then I'll introduce Paul, Sean, and Chris.
Yes, thank you, Sam, for introduction. So from our side here in Vietnam, we have a national weather forecaster as well as forecaster from our 9 regional centers. And we also have the attendant from disaster managers. Also, some of them come from national disaster management, and some of them come from provincial disaster management. So thank you very much for being here today. I know that today is quite, not say early or late, especially for some. It's almost a midnight there. So thank you very much for your time to organize this workshop and being available at the moment. And if Sam, if you okay, so I can share the session this morning, so you can have time to sleep.
Thank you very much. I'm rested. I'm okay. I'm good. I'll be there throughout. We'll be together. We can co-share.
Okay. Yes.
Yes. So now I'd like to welcome Paul. Paul, if you could say something, just so that we can all see you.
Here, I'll turn on my camera here.
Good.
There it is. Hello, everyone. Good morning to you. It's a good evening for me here, and I'm in Colorado here in the USA. It's just a little over 7 p.m., so not too bad for me. But I look forward to working with you during this workshop for today, and I think the next I'll be online too. So it's been great, and as I go through my presentations, if there's any questions, please feel free to ask as we go. I'm happy to have a discussion as we go. So yeah, so thanks for having me part of this workshop again, Sam.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, so Paul is from the USA, Comet. Yeah, we'll be happy to have you. Sean Boyce, are you there? Hi, Sean. You're muted. You're muted, Sean.
Hi everyone. Sean Boyce here from Barbados in the Caribbean. Good morning to you. Good evening to, or good morning to Sam as well. Good afternoon to Paul. I will be providing you with a presentation today regarding how impact-based forecasting is kind of handled at the institute where I'm employed. I mean, my background is in hydrology. I'm a hydrologist. I'm not a meteorologist. So when it comes to looking at the potential impact of flooding and so on, is where my role really is at the institute. So I could kind of share some of the tools that we've been using recently to support this process. So good to meet you, and we would chat a little bit later. Over.
Thank you, Sean. Good to have you. Grace?
Hi, yeah, I'm Grace. So I work in Bureau of Meteorology in Australia. So I'll just be talking a little bit more about the Australian process and what we've been doing in regards to impact-based forecasting, and also how we've gone about in terms of verifying it as well, which has always been quite a hard task.
Okay, Thank you very much, Grace. Good to have you. I just have, before we start with Paul, I just have a few things to say. One of them is to just inform the incoming team that we've been having 2 days already. You can join us because of the time difference. We've been having Gerald and Grace. No, sorry, Gerald and Elizabeth from South Africa, and it's gone on very well. One thing we've learned for the last 2 days is that when it comes to our delivery, we should talk as slowly as possible and as clearly as possible. And then after making a point at a certain point within the presentation, you allow Dr. Huang to translate into Vietnamese. So that's how it will be. It will take a little longer, but it's all worth it. So Paul, I think I'll invite you. Take into consideration that you talk slowly, talk clearly, and then from time to time you let Lam do the translation. Thank you.
Okay. Sam, I have just a quick question. Should I stop at every slide, or how should we go about making the breaks?
No, not at every slide. No, it's when you've made a substantial point, or even Lam can also cue you. Okay. Lam, you can always stop Paul if you want to say something.
Yes,
okay.
I will.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, then I think we can take it off, Paul. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So I should share my screen. So could everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks again for having me be part of the workshop. A little bit of background: I've been working in international capacity development for about 20 years now, focused on improving capacity for observations, forecasting, and other training at National Met Services for quite some time. So this is a strong interest of mine. And for the last few years, we've been working on a program called Weather Ready Nations, which is a project funded by the USAID program to implement impact-based forecasting and warning processes. So I will give a presentation today on our program that we've been implementing through this program. So the Weather Ready Nations program is implementing impact-based forecasting following the WMO guidelines. I believe that Gerald has probably talked about the guidelines through WMO that in his presentation. So the report 1150 is what we've been focused on in our implementation. So the whole idea is to change the focus from what the weather will be to what the weather will do.
So sorry, Paul.
Yep.
It seemed to me that I just see half of your screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think just like on the left-hand side.
Oh.
Yes, it's just half.
Okay, let me.
Yes, yes.
Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, great. I was in presentation mode. I'll keep it out. That'll be easier then. So, okay. Thank you for telling me that. All right, so why impact-based forecasting? So in the various countries that we work in, stakeholders make decisions based on the weather impacts on their daily activities. So decision makers, emergency managers, and other stakeholders use weather information as an input in making these decisions. And then the forecasters at the Met Services need to focus on those needs and concerns of those stakeholders so they provide the information to make those informed decisions. So the goal of the Weather Ready Nations project is to address impact forecasts and warnings. We focus on improving products and services for decision making, communicate the potential impacts of the forecasted weather. And the key idea is the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services work in close partnerships with emergency management agencies and the other stakeholders that need this information. And so, for example, I have a picture here. This is outside my house here in Colorado. And so the snow has an impact on transportation. So it impacts the roads. And so our stakeholders would need to take action on keeping people safe by keeping the cars off the roads, for example. So transitioning to, yes.
Yeah, can I have a short translation?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay, thanks. Ở đây thì cái phần đầu thì ông giới thiệu qua về bản thân ông, như thế là ông làm ở gọi là trong cái cơ quan của khí tượng gọi là Mỹ, trong cái của trường đại học của UK và chương trình COMET, và được sự tài trợ của cái chương trình USAID, cho nên họ đã xây dựng một cái hệ thống dự báo cảnh báo dựa trên tác động. Trong đấy thì là còn có một cái dự án gọi là cái dự án Weather Ready Nation, như quốc gia sẵn sàng với thời tiết. Thế thì ở đây thì chủ yếu là thực hiện cái cảnh báo, xây dựng hệ thống cảnh báo dựa trên tác động theo hướng dẫn của WMO. Thế và đối với cả cái lý do để mà họ chuyển sang cái dự báo tác động đấy là gì, là các cái đối tượng, các người dùng mà sử dụng các thông tin thời tiết, các cái stakeholders, thì là họ sẽ đưa ra các cái quyết định dựa trên các cái thông tin về thời tiết. Đặc biệt là gì, là các cái thông tin về thiên tai. Thế còn đối với cả trong hệ thống mà dự báo tác động thì khi đấy thì dự báo viên, những người dự báo thời tiết thì lại phải tập trung quan tâm hơn đến cái nhu cầu và các cái mối quan tâm của các cái stakeholder này. Thì đấy là nó khác so với cả cái hệ thống mà dự báo thời tiết thông thường. Thế còn đối với cả cái tác động hay là cái ý nghĩa của cái cảnh báo dự báo dựa trên tác động thì nó sẽ giúp cho cái cải thiện cái chất lượng sản phẩm, các cái thông tin mà đưa ra truyền thông bên ngoài, đưa ra công chúng bên ngoài, cũng như là giúp cho cái quá trình ra quyết định. Rồi thì chúng ta nói nhiều hơn đến cái khả năng tác động, cái rủi ro mà có thể tiềm tàng. Ví dụ như trường hợp ở đây thì là đối với cả cái hình ảnh mà ông ấy vừa chiếng trí thì là cái trước cửa nhà ông ấy, thì khi mà tuyết rơi như thế thì chúng ta có thể cũng không nói nhiều về vấn đề là tuyết dày bao nhiêu hay là rơi như nào, mà sẽ là có thể ảnh hưởng đến việc ví dụ như là đi lại chẳng hạn. Thì đấy chính là các cái ý nghĩa mà có thể nhìn thấy đối với cả khi mà chuyển sang cái hệ thống mà dự báo và dự báo tác động. Yes, Paul, you can keep going.
Okay, thank you. So in transitioning towards impact-based forecasting, the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services are responsible for timely forecasts and warnings. And then the stakeholders make decisions based on the impact of people's lives, the livelihoods, property, and economies. So they need this information of the impacts of the weather, not just what the weather will be. And then they also need the information on what is the potential risk to the residents of your region. And this is not just a local issue, but it really is global challenge. So coming up with the impacts of weather events is really relevant for everywhere in the world. And this is why we're here today to learn more about how this can be implemented in Vietnam. So in terms of impact-based forecasting, as I'm sure you've heard in some of the previous presentations earlier this week, we're moving from what the weather will be. For example, the forecast might be 50 millimeters of rainfall in 24 hours, along with maximum winds of 35 knots. So these are the observations, and the forecast will be towards what will those conditions do to society. For example, the heavy rain, 50 millimeters of rainfall, for example, might flood roads. So there's an impact of roads being flooded and transportation being impacted. Strong winds, for example, they could cause tree damage, trees on the roads, again, for example, so communities could be cut off from these events. So we're moving toward what are the impacts of that weather that's being predicted. So this process of moving toward impact-based forecasting really involves developing an understanding of the hazards and the vulnerabilities of the risks of the weather impacts on the society of your country, and what is that potential to become human disasters. So the whole goal is to provide warnings on the impacts to reduce that risk of having a disaster due to some weather phenomenon. In the process of weather ready nations, and also just in general of developing an impact-based forecasting system, there are associated steps in implementing the system. The first step, if you're looking at the kind of the arrow with the boxes going from left to right, is assessing the risks. When you're assessing the risks, are the hazards and vulnerabilities well known? If not, where can you find that information? Who do you need to work with and partner with to find that information? To find, are there risk maps? Is there other information from other agencies within the country to determine those hazards and vulnerabilities? The second step is monitoring and early warning. So you need to develop hazard and monitoring and early warning services if it's not available. Then you have to also look at, evaluate, are the right parameters being monitored? Do we have the right observations to help with this monitoring? Can these forecasts, these warnings, these impacts of the weather be generated timely and communicated timely? The third step is dissemination and communication. So you want to communicate the risks and these warnings to the community. Do the warnings reach those at risk? Is there a mechanism? Communication, is it through social media, radio, internet, other things, TV, for example? Can they reach all the areas that are at risk? To the people that really need to know to take action, are they getting this information? And then also, in terms of generating the messaging, you want to make sure that the information is clear, easy to understand, and actionable. And then in terms of response capability, the last step is you want to work together with your stakeholders and your partners to build a national and community response capabilities. You want to test those capabilities. Is everything up to date? Everything tested? And then there's one of the important steps is the training aspect. Does people understand this new paradigm? Are they prepared? to react to these warnings. Is this a good place to stop?
Yes, I think it's better to stop here because this is one a very important slide.
Yeah. Okay.
Ở đây thì ông ấy có nói qua một số các cái thông tin về cái việc mà xây dựng, làm nào để xây dựng lên một cái hệ thống gió tác động, thì cái đơn giản như hôm qua thì chúng ta cũng đã trao đổi rồi. Tức là từ cái việc mà chúng ta trả lời cái câu hỏi là thời tiết sẽ như thế nào ngày mai, thì bây giờ chúng ta phải chuyển sang trả lời câu hỏi là thời tiết sẽ tác động như thế nào, sẽ làm gì, sẽ gây ra cái gì, đúng không? Gây ra đổ cây cối, đường bị tắc đường, hay là ngập lụt, hay nhà cửa đổ, vân vân. Đấy, thì để mà làm được cái đấy thì cái quá trình của nó cần phải gồm 4 cái bước như trên cái slide đây. Đấy, trong cái bước đầu tiên là bước phải đánh giá được các cái rủi ro. Đấy, ở đây thì có đầu tiên là chúng ta phải hiểu về cái bản thân các cái hazard và các cái thiên tai của chúng ta, bão, mưa lớn, nắng nóng rồi vân vân. Cái thứ hai là các cái tính dễ bị tổn thương, tức là xem trong cộng đồng nào vùng dễ bị tổn thương, vùng nào dễ bị ngập, vùng nào dễ bị sạt lở, vùng nào dễ bị ảnh hưởng của sóng lớn hay là nước dâng, hay là nhà cửa ở đâu tốt, nhà cửa ở đâu kém, vân vân. Đấy là cái tính dễ bị tổn thương. Và sau đấy thì là xem là các số liệu và các cái ba loại bản đồ nó có sẵn hay không. Đấy là cái bước thứ nhất. Bước thứ hai thì là thiên về mặt khí tượng thủy văn, tức là chúng ta phải có hệ thống giám sát và dự báo sớm cho cái thiên tai đấy. Đấy, cái này là cái mà chúng ta vẫn đang làm. Thì cái đầu tiên phải có một hệ thống, sau đó là các cái thông tin nào sẽ được giám sát hay là dự báo, các yếu tố nào. Đấy, coi như là cả hệ thống quan trắc, không chỉ quan trắc khí tượng thủy văn mà có thể cả quan trắc các cái khu vực mà dễ bị sạt lở hay dễ bị ngập úng nữa. Đấy, thì còn sau đấy là các cái bản tin cảnh báo là phải đảm bảo thời gian kịp thời, chính xác. Sau đấy thì đến bước thứ ba là bước chúng ta phải truyền các cái thông điệp đấy. Tức là sau khi đã có được các cái đối tượng, các rủi ro rồi, bản thân thiên tai rồi, chúng ta sẽ ra được các cái tác động tiềm ẩn, thì chúng ta sẽ phải truyền các cái cảnh báo đấy đến đối tượng chịu tác động. Đấy, thì ở đây thì vấn đề đặt ra là chúng ta phải có một hệ thống truyền tin tốt, sớm, rồi thì các cái đảm bảo các bản tin là đến được với người dùng, và các cái thông tin đưa ra là rõ ràng, và trong đó có khuyến cáo các cái hành động cụ thể. Đấy, cái này là một cái khó mà chúng ta cũng đang cố gắng hướng đến, cũng chưa hẳn đã làm được. Và cái cuối cùng là cái bước cuối cùng là để mà có một hệ thống dự báo tác động như này thì nó phải có thêm cái năng lực ứng phó của các cấp chính quyền địa phương, của người dân, của đối tượng chịu tác động, của khu công nghiệp, của trang trại, vân vân. Thì cái này thì nếu mà xét tổng thể về một hệ thống dự báo tác động, nó là của toàn quốc. Đấy, chứ không phải chỉ riêng lĩnh vực khí tượng thủy văn. Giống như hôm đầu nó có nói là để mà xây dựng cái này nó là một cái đa lĩnh vực và nó là một quốc tế lớn, chứ không phải là rất là đơn giản trong lĩnh vực khí tượng thủy văn. Yes, I finished. Paul, you can keep going.
Okay, thank you. So the goal of an impact-based forecasting system is to change from the type of forecast where you just issue if there's going to be basically, for example, issued what the weather is going to be, as I've mentioned before. So in this case, if we're looking at a forecast of 100 millimeters an hour, 100 millimeters in 24 hours is expected. So what does that mean to the citizens on the ground? So in the impact-based forecasting, we change the paradigm to what is the impacts to the to society. For example, so we work in the metric framework, looking at the likelihoods and the impacts of those hazards. For example, there might be two areas in this example where in the orange area, this could be a medium likelihood of significant impact. So this could be an area of heavier rain, or the terrain is complex, which results in flooding and maybe landslides. And then in the outer regions where maybe the rainfall is not as intense, you have a higher likelihood, but the impacts are minor. So in developing your impact-based warning system, you'll have different areas and different thresholds for your issuing your impact warnings. So what I like to do now is show the example of what we've implemented in the island of Barbados in terms of our Weather Ready Nations project. So we've worked closely with the Barbados Met Service, their local Department of Emergency Management, and then the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, which Sean Boyce is part of, and we've been working closely with Sean and his colleagues to implement the system. On the island, based on our working together in our partnership, we've come up with main impacts, which include high winds, severe convection, heavy rainfall, tropical storms, and drought that impact the island. Based on the implementation of the impact-based forecast system in Barbados, again, we have these hazards. So the primary hazards, as I mentioned, high winds, severe convection, heavy rain, and tropical cyclones. Secondary hazards associated with those primary hazards. So you can have high seas with the high winds, a small craft impacts, tertiary impacts for high winds, wind shear, flight hazards, for flight operations, small boats, high surf impacts, and health and safety to populations. For severe convection, associated with heavy rain, lightning, wind, flooding, and flash flooding. Again, the tertiary impacts is health and safety of the people on the island, requiring evacuations if needed. Heavy rainfall events, similar, can result in flash flooding, and flooding in general. The impacts, roads flooded, homes could be destroyed, crops could fail. Again, health and safety of the population. And then tropical cyclones kind of brings all those hazards together, where you can also have structural damage, again, to infrastructure and, of course, the health and safety of the population. Is this a good place to stop? Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, I think you can keep going.
Okay, great. So the impact-based forecast system is developed and defined for each region. For each country, you come up with your own impact tables. So the impact tables define the different levels of the impact. The impacts really depend on the vulnerability of that region. And working together with disaster management agencies, you can help put together and provide that input for those tables. So again, this is probably something that was shown in the last few days from Gerald or Elizabeth, but the different levels of impact. So if really no warnings are necessary, if there's minimal impacts to the hazards, so day-to-day activities are not impacted, but maybe some localized small-scale impacts could occur. Minor impacts, some local incidents, minor disruptions, but for the most part, business continues as usual for emergency management. When you reach the level of significant impacts, disruption to day-to-day routines could be impacted, but mostly it's focused on localized. There could be short-term impacts on emergency responders and other organizations. And then if you see a severe impact from a weather hazard, this could be widespread prolonged events, significant disruptions to day-to-day routines, and this could really strain the emergency response of the community. So like a tropical cyclone that would would impact the country and be there for a day or many days could have a severe impact to the country, for example. So through the process of the Weather Ready Nations program, we developed impacts matrices for the different hazards. And so this is just one example. I didn't want to show all the examples, but here is the impact for winds. So minimal impact for winds, for example, debris. There could be localized loose debris like garbage, branches, other things blown around. This could result in isolated transport routes being affected. So maybe some of the minor roads could be impacted. So minor impacts. So there's localized tumbling of unsecured objects. So inflatable structures, tents, garbage bins, things like this. This could also result in some localized or regional impacts to transportation, for example. When you reach significant impacts, there could be significant tumbling and rolling of objects. Again, structures that are not secure, tents, for example, garbage bins, and this could result in some significant impacts to transportation, causing roads to be closed and so on. And then when you reach severe impacts, so very strong winds, this could result in a lifting of unsecured objects. So this could result in damage or injury to people. Again, things that are not secured down, it could result in damage or danger to life. And this could result in major issues with transportation, for example, on the island that we developed. So going through that process, we've also then come up with a response based on those different impacts. So again, for just an example of wind, so the minimal impacts, business as usual. Generally, the Met Services, they monitor for changing conditions. Low impact, so be aware of these tumbling objects, for example, increased travel times. Power lines in isolated cases might be down, and outages. And then significant impacts, so be prepared. So again, the messaging, the response is be prepared for these objects to be rolling around, they're unsecured, could be falling limbs, choppy seas, and so on. You want to secure your objects that are loose, like garbage bins. Be prepared for traffic delays, road closures. Be prepared for down power lines, for example, and also prepare for this impact, such as preparing for having extra water or food, for example. And then the last, that's the most significant impact. So this is a take action. You want to take action. You really want to secure any loose objects. Traffic will likely be delayed, for example, and there will likely be impacts due to power outages, power lines down on roads. So you want to have prepared for an extended outages, for example, from this high impact. So, and again, this is probably just a review from previous presentations, but you want to come up with a risk and response matrix. So you combine the likelihood of those impacts and the potential impacts to determine that risk and response. And you've probably seen this before. I'm sure you have from previous presentations. So you use a matrix to look at if it's going to be, what's the likelihood of this impact, and is this impact, what's the severity of this impact in terms of the risk and response.
Sorry, Paul.
Yes.
Before I would like to stop here to translate. But before I do the translation, just want to ask a question about the response recommendation. So for the green one, you say the risk is very low, and we don't need to take any action. But how about in normal weather, because I understand that whenever we have a hazard, we will issue the warning, but then we recommend that the public doesn't need to do anything. Is that for the green one?
Yeah, for what we do is for the warnings are not issued unless it becomes an orange or red hazard, so significant or severe, and then you would issue the warning. So that's when you want to inform the public to take action. When it's minimal or minor, and the likelihood is low. So in the green and in yellow, what generally happens is you monitor the conditions for that in case it looks like it's going to change to be more significant or severe, and then you'd want to issue a warning.
So for the green one, it's just like what do you say for that kind of forecast? That's just a monitoring.
Yeah, it's just monitoring. And again, you don't want to issue a warning just to keep people aware that these are conditions, and just be aware that conditions may change, and if so, we might send out a response that may want you to take action.
Okay, I see. I got it. Thanks. Now I do the translation first.
Okay.
Đây thì ông có mới tiếp cái phần tiếp theo về một cái ví dụ trong một quá trình xây dựng cái ma trận tác động và ma trận response, ma trận ứng phó đấy, cho một cái quốc gia là Barbados này. Thì ở đây thì các cái bước làm đầu tiên là sẽ tìm hiểu về các cái loại thiên tai ở đấy, xem có các thiên tai gì. So can you come back to the slide number 11? Đầu tiên là các loại thiên tai. Yes. Các loại thiên tai đấy là gì? Đây thì các cái liệt kê các loại thiên tai ở khu vực này. Yes. Next slide please. Sau đấy thì là chúng ta sẽ có một cái bảng mô tả về các cái gọi là tác động sơ cấp, thứ cấp và gọi là gì, tam cấp hay là cái gì đấy. Đấy. Thế thì ở đây thì cái này chỉ là các cái mô tả gọi là khái niệm thôi, định nghĩa. Ví dụ như là với mỗi loại thiên tai nó sẽ có từng cái loại tác động khác nhau. Tác động thứ cấp sơ cấp là tác động chính, tác động của bản thân cái thiên tai, sau đó từ cái tác động sơ cấp nó thành ra một cái tác động khác. Thì chúng ta sẽ có các bảng thông tin này để chúng ta nắm được là gì, là ví dụ như là mưa mà kéo dài thì gây ra cái gì, hay là bão chẳng hạn, ban đầu là cái gì, sau đấy thì bão có thể gây ra cái gì, thứ cấp gì, thậm chí là còn có thể các cái tác động sau đấy nữa. Đấy. Thế thì sau khi có được cái mô tả từng các cái loại tác động cho từng thiên tai thì bước tiếp theo thì chúng ta sẽ phải mô tả chung về các cái tác động của thiên tai đấy. Ở đây là các cái, so next slide please. Thì tác động ở các cái thiên tai đấy thì ở đây là các cái cấp mà như hôm qua chúng ta là 4 cái cấp. Thì trong cái cấp 1, cấp 2 thì là ở các cái quy mô nhỏ, quy mô địa phương. Thế còn cái cấp 3 trở nên là bắt đầu là có ảnh hưởng, gây ra thay đổi các cái sinh hoạt hàng ngày của chúng ta, tức là ảnh hưởng đến các sinh hoạt hàng ngày. Và cấp 4 là sẽ là xảy ra trên diện rộng và kéo dài. Yeah, next slide please. Thế còn sau đấy thì đối với cả cái ma trận đấy thì mô tả ở trên chỉ là chung thôi. Và sau đấy chúng ta sẽ phải làm từng thiên tai, mỗi thiên tai lại có một cái bảng cái ma trận tác động riêng. Chúng ta phải mô tả cụ thể, ví dụ gió, đối với cả cái gió mà cái cấp minimal là gì, cấp minor là gì, significant là gì, đối với cả từng cái thiên tai, một gió này, mưa này, lũ này, vân vân. Tất cả những cái đấy là chúng ta sẽ phải có các bảng mô tả tương ứng. Sau này thì chúng ta sẽ dùng các cái tác động này để chúng ta đưa vào các cái khuyến cáo. Và cuối cùng là gì, là chúng ta sẽ phải có một cái một ma trận về cái gọi là phản ứng. So next slide please. Thì ở đây thì với các nước này thì họ lại hơi khác chúng ta một chút, tức là cái cấp 1 kia, cấp màu xanh ấy, thì tôi vừa hỏi thì là họ bảo là cái cấp màu xanh thì coi như là họ chỉ đưa ra cái gọi là cái cảnh báo về gọi là watching, monitoring thôi, tức là chúng ta đang giám sát có khả năng xảy ra cái thiên tai đấy, chứ chúng ta chưa đưa ra cảnh báo. Đấy, chưa đưa ra một cái thông tin gì chính thức cả, bởi vì lúc này là coi như chúng ta khuyến cáo người dân là chưa phải làm gì cả, mà chỉ có là theo dõi thường xuyên thời tiết chẳng hạn, hoặc là quan sát xung quanh vân vân. Thế còn khi mà đã lên đến cái cấp vàng thì họ mới bắt đầu đưa ra cảnh báo. Đấy. Thì cái này là cái mà cũng tương đối khác so với cả Việt Nam, mà khi chúng ta đã đưa ra cảnh báo thiên tai thì chúng ta đều có ít nhất là cấp 1. Đúng không? Còn nếu không thì chúng ta đã không đưa ra cảnh báo gì luôn. Ở đây là họ đưa ra cảnh báo màu xanh thì cũng là coi như là chỉ là cái đề nghị là theo dõi thôi, chứ không phát đi cảnh báo. Yes, okay, I finish and you can.
Can I
Yes.
ask one question?
So there's a question.
Okay.
Yes, about the question of the response and sarcasm. Would we consider about period of disaster occur? We are divide the period of the disaster occur or disaster appear.
Những chi tiết là gì?
Cái giai đoạn
Tức là thời gian kéo dài hay là thời gian xuất hiện trong năm?
thời gian xuất hiện trong năm.
So the question is, when we divide in different levels, have you considered the time of the year or the season of the year when the hazard occur?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So when developing the risk and response matrices for the different hazards, the local knowledge of your weather is very important in coming up with the matrices. So in that, maybe there's certain times of year where it's maybe the dry season, so there's no convective weather, but could be extreme heat, for example. So the time of the year can be very important and the location.
No, I think he meant that if like consider the same hazard like strong wind, but it happened in different time of the year, because at that time we might have different how to say, different people or different object to consider. For example, like summertime when we have a lot of tourists, or in winter time when we have much less. So do you consider that in this matrix?
So what we do is it's focused on sector specific. So I just showed, for example, transportation, but then you could also have a sector specific matrices for tourism. So during the tourist season, your messaging, your response would be different than the season when there's no tourists or minimal tourists, based on that hazard. So you developed your responses based on there's just different sectors for like aviation, for maybe for marine, tourism, things like this. Yes. So yeah, it would be developed for these different sectors, which then might be just focused on different times of the year.
Okay, I see. Tức là cái câu trả lời của ông lúc trước thì ông có nói rằng là các cái bảng này thì cũng có đều dựa vào cái thời gian trong năm. Đấy, thì ví dụ như là mùa khô thì các thiên tai khác, mùa mưa các thiên tai khác, nhưng mà lúc tôi hỏi lại cái ý của anh chắc không phải như thế, đúng không? Ý của anh thì tôi hỏi lại là ví dụ cùng một thiên tai, ví dụ là gió mạnh hay mưa lớn, thì là mưa lớn trong mùa hè khác, và trong mưa lớn mùa đông khác, và gió mạnh trong mùa hè khác, mùa đông khác. Thì câu trả lời của ông là cái này, tại vì lúc tôi giải thích thì tôi bảo là ví dụ mùa hè thì có du lịch, nước, rồi cây cối phát triển nó cũng khác. Thì ông bảo với cái matrix này thì là xây dựng cho từng ngành riêng biệt.
Đúng rồi.
Đấy, cho nông nghiệp một matrix riêng, cho du lịch một matrix riêng, cho y tế, cho nông nghiệp, mỗi một ngành nó lại có một cái mô tả riêng. Đấy, cho nên là khi làm từng ngành như thế thì chúng ta cũng xem xét luôn là cái thời gian trong năm luôn. Đấy, bởi vì mỗi một ngành nó lại có một đặc trưng riêng. Đấy, cho nên là nó sẽ không bị cái này gọi nó là vừa là cho từng thiên tai nhưng lại là cho từng lĩnh vực không. Đấy, mình rất là cụ thể. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you have another question. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Bá mời giống nghe thôi. Giả sử cái đó BOM thì bá của sao giống nó phát triển cực im anh đấy. Thứ rồi phải phát sân nha. Ví dụ trong bá của thì phải phép đến hai cái quân đi đến từ đó. Sao? Để có thể khi nó phải là
okay, anh sẽ hỏi. Paul?
Yes.
So there's an like assumption that the forecaster issue a warning about thunderstorm. So about 5 minutes ago, we issue kind of like orange or yellow warning. But 5 minutes later, we see that it can become very severe thunderstorm, and then we think that it needs to be to orange or even red warning. So what should we do in that case? We reissue the warning, or what should we do?
Yes, that would be the the process that you would want to communicate to the emergency managers that the conditions have changed and the impact has become from, say, minor to severe, and for example, the likelihood is high. So that's important that you want to communicate that to the public as fast as possible.
Okay. Thì ông nói là cái đấy là cái mà chúng ta phải communicate ngay, và cũng nên nói rõ là tại sao chúng ta thay đổi. Đấy, ví dụ trong cái bảng này là gì, là do cái likelihood nó tăng lên, nên nó đi từ màu vàng lên màu cam. Đấy, hay là likelihood nó vẫn như thế nhưng mà cái cường độ cơn dông nó lại tăng lên thì nó đi từ màu vàng lên màu cam và theo cái hướng trục ngang. Đấy, thì cái đấy ông bảo cái khi mà có cái thông tin thay đổi như thế chúng ta phải cập nhật ngay.
Em có câu hỏi là các cái bảng tác động ấy, tính cho từng năm nhưng mà có sử dụng hoặc là dựa vào các cái kết quả trong quá khứ đã từng xảy ra trong quá khứ không ạ?
Cái này là quá khứ chứ, nên là dựa trên kinh nghiệm cá nhân, cả kinh nghiệm của địa phương. Lúc mà anh Minh có hỏi đấy thì là ông cũng nói là cái local knowledge trong việc xây dựng cái này rất quan trọng. Thì các nhà khí tượng không thể làm một mình được, phải có người dân, phải có anh chị bên phòng chống thiên tai. Nếu mà mình làm cho thủy sản mình phải làm việc các anh chị bên thủy sản, bên nông nghiệp, tức là mình phải làm từng ngành tìm hiểu cùng nhau, trao đổi thì mới ra được các cái mô tả như trên kia.
Như nãy là nói như từng ngành sẽ có một cái bảng quan trọng riêng. Đối với một đội hình thiên tai khi mình đưa ra cái dự báo tác động thì cái mức độ ưu tiên mình đưa vào cái bản tin được đưa ra là mình sẽ có thông tin ngành nào, nông nghiệp, giao thông, thủy sản hay là y tế, mình sẽ đưa cái nào vào, bởi vì rất là nhiều thông tin tác động.
Ok, anh sẽ hỏi, nhưng chắc nó cũng giống như hôm qua, cái nguyên tắc là cái nào tác động lớn nhất.
Cái nào lớn nhất thì đưa vào.
Nguyên tắc là ví dụ cũng là thủy sản này, ví dụ cùng trong một cái tỉnh này, ví dụ vừa thủy sản vừa nông nghiệp, vừa y tế vừa trường học, thì mình phải xem cái nào nó tác động lớn nhất thì mình cảnh báo về. So he has another question about when because we have different impact for different stakeholders like school or farming or fishermen. So in that time maybe the risk level for different stakeholders are different. So what should we do in that case?
Yes, that is correct. That's a great question. In that case, you would create your message to be very specific that maybe there's a high impact for fishermen, but for schools maybe it's a low impact. So in your messaging, you want to be very clear and concise on what the impact is and who's going to be impacted or what's the potential impact on that messaging. So you create the messaging specific to the hazard on who's going to be impacted.
Yes, thank you. Thế cái câu trả lời của ông còn rõ hơn, đó là gì, là khi đấy nếu mà mình đã xác định được là cái rủi ro cho từng đối tượng nó khác nhau như thế, thì trong cái tin cảnh báo hay cái thông tin mình đưa ra ngoài mình phải nói rõ cụ thể luôn. Ví dụ nó là rất cao đối với cả thủy sản, với tàu thuyền, trung bình với trường học, hoặc là rất thấp với cả người dân trong khu đô thị, ví dụ như thế, nó càng cụ thể càng tốt. Thanks. Oh,
You're welcome.
Okay,
yeah,
if I
keep going. Sorry.
Could you mute the?
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Just to point out, it's going very well. I'm very happy with this. But time-wise, I think this session was supposed to be 45 minutes. We've gone up to 50. It doesn't matter very much. Just to alert you that we will need to move a bit faster. So, because today is quite charged. Okay, but yeah, okay, just to point out. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam, for reminding.
Yes. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, this is great discussion. So,
yeah, it's excellent.
Yes, no, it's very nice. I'm enjoying it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I will continue on. So here's just an example of using the risk matrix. So in this case, the forecasters identify a region where rainfall could have impacts. Then you have to identify what's the most appropriate impact level, identified for the area. What's the expected likelihood or probability of those impacts to occur? And then you want to assign a warning risk level or associated color for that impact. So in this case, the area in the center of Barbados, for example, there is high likelihood of a minor impact due to that hazard of rainfall for that region. And then maybe in your area there's some areas that have higher vulnerability, so you'd want to then look at that area and possibly assign a higher vulnerability to the area. So in the case on the map, in the area in the center of the island, shaded by orange, in this case, you see that there's in this example, there's a likelihood, a medium likelihood of significant impacts due to that rainfall event. So different areas will have different impacts of those hazards. So as you guys, the questions that were being asked, the different impacts and likelihoods, for example, yellow and orange, these warnings require a different response from disaster management. So it is really specific on that messaging based on these areas here. So you would create your messaging focus on those different impacts. Now I just want to talk a little bit about partnerships and collaborations and building an impact-based forecast system. So the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services and emergency manager agencies really need to work together in partnership with other government agencies to make this work and be successful. So, and the whole idea is you develop an information and service plan, so share the data among the different agencies, and this is very critical for success. So, what are the demographics, GIS information, the economics, and so on. Should I continue on?
So I think, yeah, you can keep going.
Okay. So in our development of impact-based forecast system through the Weather Ready Nations project, we've gone about implementing it in different phases, and I just want to go through the different phases we've taken to implement the impact-based forecast system on Barbados, for example. So in phase one, kind of the beginning of developing your impact-based forecast system, you want to collect the data of the region. You want to start developing your hazard, risks, and response matrices. You want to look at what data is available for developing these matrices, and then using that information to develop hazard and response matrices. Again, working with your partners, your stakeholders, to see what's the most important information that is needed in developing this impact-based forecast system. So in phase two, you want to expand this activity to create sector-specific matrices. As I mentioned before, the sectors could be health, for example, public works, the transportation sector, aviation, marine, tourism. So what are the most important sectors that you want to focus on in your impact-based forecast system? The next step, phase three, develop your forecaster and disaster management interface. What is the framework you're going to communicate the information from the forecasters to the emergency managers? What kind of tools, what kind of software? And I think Sean will be talking a little bit about this in his presentation coming up. But it's important to have that common framework so you can back and forth with the different agencies. Once you've developed the impact-based forecasting framework, you want to update, develop or update your standard operating procedures and what kind of actions do you want to take between the different agencies, specifically through the meteorological services and the emergency management agencies. Phase five is demonstrating the capabilities. So it's very important to provide training about impact-based forecasting to the forecasters, to the emergency managers, develop education outreach to the media and other stakeholders so they understand and know how to respond to impact-based forecasts and warnings. And then the key is to practice. Practice and just keep working through it so everybody is comfortable with this new paradigm. And you can use case studies from previous events, for example, and go through the process so that everybody's prepared for when it's implemented and there's actually events occurring to take action with this impact-based forecasting. And then the last phase that we've implemented is developing public awareness and outreach to the communities, so they understand that when you issue these messagings, how they should respond. So you want to make the citizens of the area aware of what is impact-based forecasting and what does that mean to them. And then this is just my last kind of a summary slide. Some of the challenges of making this successful. Both forecasters and emergency managers need to really invest and commit to this paradigm shift of impact-based forecasts and warnings. There needs to be this building up of expertise like we're talking about here in the workshop to create and use impact-based forecasts. The different agencies need to incorporate social science to understand what kind of messaging the people respond to into their operations. And then the success of the whole program is really that partnership of working together to develop these impacts, the hazards and response matrices to make this system successful. So I think that's the end of my presentation. I'll stop here for, I guess if you want to translate, and if there's any more questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So thank you.
Yes, thanks for very good, very informative slides. Yeah, so về cái phần này thì mọi người thấy là ông ấy có lấy một cái ví dụ về các cái bảng ma trận với các cái màu khác nhau và các cái tùy thuộc vào cường độ của thiên tai rồi thì cái xác suất xảy ra thì từ đấy thì chúng ta sẽ có các cái ứng phó nó khác nhau, chứ không phải cứ màu vàng là tất cả các màu vàng đều giống nhau. Cái màu vàng của cái việc mà xác suất cao với cả tác động thấp khác với cả cái màu vàng của tác động lớn nhưng mà lại xác suất nhỏ. Thì cái kế hoạch ứng phó nó sẽ khác nhau, thì cái này là cái cần hợp tác rất chặt giữa khí tượng thủy văn và phòng thiên tai cũng các đơn vị về ứng phó. Còn đối với cả cái nhấn mạnh, ông vẫn nhấn mạnh lại cái ngày hôm qua, ngày hôm đầu tiên chúng ta có là cái hợp tác phối hợp với các đơn vị, cái partnership là cái cực kỳ quan trọng để mà xây dựng cái này. Về một cái ví dụ cho cái xây dựng một cái gọi là cái weather ready nation của quốc gia mà sẵn sàng ứng phó thời tiết, thì ông có cái kinh nghiệm này là ông ấy chia sẻ thì có mấy cái pha này. Pha đầu tiên thì là chúng ta phải thu thập được các cái số liệu về ma trận, về rủi ro, về thiên tai và các cái xây dựng các cái ma trận phản ứng, ma trận ứng phó. Sau đấy là đánh giá rồi xây dựng các công cụ và phát triển các cái ma trận tổ hợp để vừa là thiên tai vừa là ứng phó. Cái pha thứ hai là gì, là xây dựng các cái matrix cho từng cái lĩnh vực riêng. Pha thứ ba là chúng ta phải xây dựng các cái interface để có thể giao tiếp, truyền tin, chia sẻ thông tin giữa khí tượng thủy văn với các đơn vị khác trong lĩnh vực phòng chống thiên tai. Pha thứ tư là xây dựng lên các cái SOP tức là các cái quy trình hợp tác, quy trình truyền tin, quy trình cảnh báo là truyền tin giữa khí tượng thủy văn với các đơn vị về phòng chống thiên tai và các cái tình trạng khẩn cấp. Pha thứ năm là chúng ta phải đưa ra cái gọi là cái demonstration, tức là cái minh chứng, cái thử nghiệm. Đấy, có một số các cái hội thảo rồi tập huấn để thử nghiệm. Pha thứ sáu thì là chúng ta phải tuyên truyền ngoài cộng đồng để người dân cũng hiểu được các cái màu với các cái khuyến cáo đấy để ứng phó. Thì đấy là 6 cái pha mà như ông nói là để mà xây dựng một cái gọi là cái weather ready nation. Thế còn đối với cả cái phần mà thách thức thì những cái slide trên ông có nói thì là đây là để mà làm được cái này thì bắt buộc là các dự báo viên và các nhà quản lý về thiên tai, bao gồm tất cả các bộ ngành có liên quan đến thiên tai, thì chúng ta phải commit, phải cam kết cùng nhau làm thì mới thực hiện được cái này. Cái thứ hai là gì, là chúng ta phải có các cái chuyên gia, các chuyên gia trong từng lĩnh vực để tạo ra và sử dụng các cái ma trận. Như chúng ta nói là để mà mỗi ma trận ra một lĩnh vực riêng, chúng ta phải có sự chia sẻ kinh nghiệm và cùng nhau xây dựng những cái ma trận đấy, cái ma trận mà ứng phó và tác động đấy, cho từng lĩnh vực riêng. Sau đấy thì là chúng ta sẽ phải phối kết hợp với các cái nhà khoa học về xã hội học, về truyền thông, về giáo dục cộng đồng, vân vân. Và để mà thành công thì cái câu ý cuối cùng của ông nói kia thì là chúng ta phải về rủi ro để sau này chúng ta có thể xây dựng một cái hệ thống interface chung giữa cơ quan khí tượng và các cái đơn vị của người ta thì mới chúng ta mới thực hiện được cái vấn đề này. Để đến phần cuối thì các anh chị xem còn có câu hỏi gì nữa không? Tại vì phần này là như ông Sam nhắc thì là cũng là gần hết thời gian. Nếu mà các anh chị có thể có câu hỏi gì chúng ta sẽ hỏi sau, vì là cái phần đầu là 45 phút thì chúng ta đã qua mất khoảng 1 tiếng rồi. Thanks, Paul. So I think yeah, we at the moment we don't have any question, and if we have any, we can post on the link on our website.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
thanks.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing now then.
So thank you very much, Paul. That was excellent. Your slides are very, very informative. There is something I should have done right from the beginning that I didn't do, but I guess it's not too late to just tell you who Paul is, actually. If you go to the website, you see that we have a link to the expert biodata. So if you want to know who these people are that are talking to you, you can go in there. But just to point out that Paul, Dr. Kusera, is an assistant director of the COMET program at the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research, that's UCA in the US. And he leads the International Capacity Development Program. Okay, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, you're welcome. And yeah, I'm always happy to answer more questions about comments or other things we do here too. So, but yeah, thank you for that introduction.
Okay, thank you. I now would like to welcome Mr. Sean Boyce. Mr. Sean Boyce holds a postgraduate degree in sustainable management of water environment from Newcastle University in the United Kingdom, from where he graduated in 2006 with distinction. And the same year, he started working at the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, where he's currently on staff as the chief hydrologist. His primary roles in the institute include the management of hydrology training program, implementation of research and development projects and programs, and execution of business development interests. He also supports operational hydrology workflows and development and maintenance of impact-based forecasting tools and early warning systems for use by weather and climate-sensitive sectors, including the Caribbean DeWetra platform, a geospatial data fusion platform that integrates hazard data for improved decision-making. Welcome to Sean Boyce.
All right, thank you, Sam, and good day to everyone. Please verify that you are seeing my presentation. Is everyone seeing the slide? You should be seeing the title slide.
Yes, we can see your slide.
Great, excellent. All right, so my role today here, I guess, maybe slightly different to presentations that you would have seen before. As Sam pointed out, my background is in hydrology, 1, and 2, I do not work at an operational meteorological service. My employment is with a regional institution in the Caribbean. So just permit me, if you will, to just give a bit of a background on the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, as it is, I guess, important to set the context for the presentation. So we are a WMO regional training center in Region 4, where we are known to support research in meteorology, hydrology, and climatology. We are also a regional data archiving center, instrument center, Center of Excellence in Satellite Meteorology, Climate Center, and so on and so forth. So the presentation is given from the position of an institute that supports Met services, in this case in the Caribbean, to develop and improve various services and activities that they may want to engage in, which obviously includes training, capacity development, and so on. As it relates to impact-based forecasting, we have been working with colleagues in Italy to implement a GIS-based platform known as the Caribbean Multi-Directional Platform, which essentially can be thought of as being a tool to support the development and delivery of impact-based forecasting. So just to give a very quick background. Through a project 2 years ago, we worked with the Italian government to implement a version of the directional platform in the Caribbean. The platform was actually developed by colleagues from the Team Research Foundation based in Savona, Italy. And one of the outputs from the project was to kind of replicate what was being used in Italy as part of their civil defense setup in the Caribbean, to enable better decision making between Met services and disaster management personnel. Around that same time is when WMO 1150 document was kind of circulating, and we recognized very quickly that the platform itself was essentially a tool that can be used to support impact-based forecasting based on the descriptions included in WMO 1150. That is, it enables the fusion of information, including hazard data, exposure data, as well as social data and so on, all towards making an improved decision. And it allows persons from different fields, whether it is in meteorology or disaster management, to essentially see the same information, and it fosters collaboration and improves decision making, as I said. So the presentation today really kind of focuses on the platform and kind of demonstrates how it is used at CAMH to support the formulation of impact-based forecasts and how we envision it being used by Met Services. As I would have pointed out, we're not an operational service, but we do support development of tools and so on to support our various members. So what you'll find is that the platform itself supports basically the first three elements of the early warning system that's defined by the UN. And Paul would have gone through this in his previous presentation. I'll just list them here again. We have risk knowledge, monitoring and warning, and dissemination and communication. So that's kind of where we would focus the presentation on these three key elements and relate them back to the platform itself. Please let me know when they need to stop for you to allow you to do the translation. So just a bit of background on the platform itself. It's a fully operational real-time system for hydrometeorological forecasting. As they would have pointed out, it's used by Italian Civil Protection Department and designed by our colleagues at the Team Research Foundation. It's GIS based, it's online, and essentially uses information from multiple sources, whether it be from multiple institutions or agencies, or publicly available information on the web. But essentially, it allows for persons to have access to near real-time data, forecast data, observational data, and so on and so forth, as you will see shortly, and being able to compare, contrast hazard-specific data with the potential exposures to enable you to perhaps make an informed decision. It's not something that was kind of reinvented. Essentially, there are other instances of the directional platform across the globe. The Caribbean just one such instance, but it has been deployed in other areas throughout the globe. And if you require more information about it, of course, they can get that to you. So essentially, this slide kind of captures what it's all about, the basic idea, where you can overlay your exposure information. So, for example, the location of critical assets, whether that be hospitals, government facilities, shelters, schools, police stations, housing, so on and so forth. And combining that with hazard information, which could be in the form of a forecast, whether it be wind, rain, dust, what have you. And when you compare the exposures with the hazard information, you get a visual sense, at least a qualitative sense of vulnerability. So having access to all the different layers in one location essentially is kind of what we see the benefits of the platform being. Essentially it's using it where you can then perhaps identify areas where you may expect a potential impact to occur, especially if you have knowledge of the area, local knowledge of the area. So the next couple of slides just kind of runs through some snapshots of the application. At this point, is your basic it's a GIS-based application, which allows you to integrate multiple data sets. So here you're taking a look at observation data sets, which would include your rainfall gauges, water level gauges, also satellite products that may be available from various sources, including marine observations and so on. Your GOES information as well from your GOES 16 satellite would be another example. And this information is available in near real time and constantly updated within the platform itself. So let's have a quick snapshot of 4 products that we would use to support the process. The top right, you're looking at a satellite rainfall product produced by, I believe, NASA, the iMerge. Some may be familiar with that. Top right hand would be information coming in from rainfall stations on the ground at a particular location. The bottom left is a drought index, SPI, I believe, which covers the Caribbean region. You can use that to kind of support whether you may expect increased chances of runoff, let's say, given that the last few months were unusually dry. So obviously that will have an impact on potential flooding. But these are types of information sets that are taken into consideration when trying to anticipate possible impacts. And the bottom right is a water level station installed in one of our beneficiary countries. So having access to this observation information kind of guides the users as to whether one may expect potential impacts in the next, let's say, 24 hours or so. Similar to observation products, there's also forecast information. So at CIMH, we would run a numerical weather forecast model across the Caribbean. And that combined with your typical globally available data sets, GFS, for example, ECMWF, and so on. One could also use these types of information to support impact forecasts by examining the rainfall that may be expected, or the winds, for example, over a particular area. So a typical example of those products may include, excuse me, as it's pointed out, GFS forecast over the area as is shown in the top left-hand corner. The top right is showing an illustration of potential significant wave heights associated with some storm that was traversing the Caribbean region. And you also have things like dust forecast and so on. But essentially, the idea is that being able to integrate the forecast information as well as observations provides another layer of information to support potential impacts. So if you're looking at potential impacts over the next 48 hours or so, then one would usually typically look at the current conditions by considering the observations. And then by looking at what is projected, try to use that information to determine what one may expect to happen in the future. Right, so where the key to it really comes in is when you start to integrate or consider, to say, that information which we consider to be static. So it's not a hazard data set, it's not rainfall, it's not weather related observations. It is really your exposures, or in some cases it may actually represent a flood hazard map, a landslide risk map, or so on. So if I know I am expecting, based on my forecast, let's say 200 millimeters of rainfall in perhaps 6 hours, and I know that rainfall is projected to occur over an area that I know is the landslides, and I can map out based on GIS environment exactly where one expects that rainfall to occur, it should be reasonable to assume that the impact expected to be in the general area based on the flood map, the landslide mapping that may have been done in the past. So a user within the platform, if he or she has access to this information, even though he or she may not necessarily be familiar with the area, but having access to the hazard map along with the projected rainfall accumulations, he or she should be able to make a reasonable determination as to what to expect. You can also include things like population as well, if you want to perhaps look at the number of population, the number of the population that may be exposed to a particular event. So should you have that information available, it can typically be included when you start looking at analyzing the potential risk or impact moving forward, especially if you have the population broken down in terms of various vulnerabilities, whether it be the older generation, people who may be differently abled, and so on and so forth. So this is an example of a typical slice susceptibility map for this is Dominica, a country in the Caribbean. So the darker areas that you see here represent areas that are highly susceptible to landslides. So as I would have pointed out, if you were to expect to see, based on your observations and forecasts, a high amount of rainfall projected to occur in the south of Dominica, it's reasonable to assume that you would expect to have some landslide activity in that area, and your impact-based forecast would suggest language that would cover the potential impact of landslides on the surroundings. So this slide is kind of looks at the integrating of GIS data sets that may be available on public data platforms such as WMS platforms and mapping service platforms. You would find that, well, we have found that some of these publicly available data sets are useful to include on the platform itself to add to the exposure data sets that you may get from other sources. So within the platform itself, the information of WMS survey information is something that can be facilitated. All right, to kind of sum it up, I believe I have two slides that kind of sums up what I'm trying to get across. So this is a slide showing Guyana. Guyana is a country in South America, one of our member states. And typically this is how the platform will be used, where one may look at the rainfall observations based on the weather radar in the area, or rain gauges or what have you, and overlay that typically over the watersheds, for example, in this case. So one would expect flooding in a watershed where there are heavy echoes of reflectivity. And with that information, one could possibly identify where the impacts are expected to take place. And you can get down to various levels of granularity, whether you want to actually start thinking about what may happen at the district level, let's say, provided you have the information to support such. But hopefully you should get a picture of how you can bring information together into one GIS type environment to help make that decision. So this is typically an example of nowcasting, let's say. Similarly, excuse me, one could do this a similar type scenario in a forecasting context. This is Jamaica, another island in the Caribbean. And again, you have, I believe, what looks like hydrologic units overlaid on top of a forecast from our weather forecasting model. So in this particular case, one could expect some rainfall based on the model guidance, some rainfall in northern watersheds in Jamaica. And Jamaica actually has some steep slopes in that general area, so potentially an impact-based forecast would probably speak to things like the expected in a particular region based on the projections from the model guidance. Right, so the other aspect to it is not only being able to identify areas that may be impacted by specific hazards. But as you'll recall, when we would have looked at the UN description of early warning system, there's also a dissemination component. So on board, the platform itself is another tool that is really geared towards the dissemination of information. So Paul would have done a good job at walking you through the matrix, which was developed under the Weather Ready Nations program. So as Paul pointed out, the CIMH is working with others to support the development of the rollout, I should say, of the Weather Ready Nations program in Barbados, as Barbados is one of our member countries. So we've been working with the Barbados Met Service and UCAR and some others to roll that out. So part of the development of the Duetto platform at CIMH was due to the Weather Ready Nations program. They supported some of the improvements to the platform to support impact-based forecasting. The one such improvement includes the development of this tool called Web Alert, and it is to be used as a tool to disseminate impact-based forecasts based on the matrix and the workflow that Paul has demonstrated. So the idea behind it is that you can have these predefined areas, and based on the hazards of interest, whether it be rain, flood, tsunami, severe convection, one can identify the zone where the impact is expected. So if you think back to the previous slides presented, this is kind of where the GIS environment comes in handy, where you can take on board that information and then utilize it to try to delineate areas where you expect the impact to occur for specific hazards. And as you would have...
Just a second. Just to alert Lam, in case you want to stop, don't worry too much about the time. If you want to do some translation, you can. Yeah, you can stop. You can stop, Sean. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, maybe I can give a brief summary for whatever you have introduced in the last few slides.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Ở đây thì là cái ông Sean này là ở cái gọi là cơ quan khí tượng của khu vực Caribe, tức là khu vực theo như cái giới thiệu đây thì là nó cũng gần như một cái trung tâm khí tượng khu vực giống như ở Nhật Bản vậy. Đấy, thì là phụ trách cái khu vực Caribe này, các nước ở vùng Caribe thì đây cũng là cái nước nơi mà chịu trách nhiệm các cái cảnh báo thiên tai cho các nước ở khu vực Caribe. Đấy thì với sự hỗ trợ của chính phủ Italia thì họ đã xây dựng một cái gọi là cái platform đấy để thu thập cũng như là tích hợp các loại thông tin và đưa ra cái cảnh báo. Thì trong 4 cái nhân tố của cái hệ thống cảnh báo tác động thì nó có cái risk knowledge này, cái monitoring này, cái dissemination và cái response capacity. Thì cái trong cái platform này nó gồm 3 cái đầu. Riêng cái response capacity thì nó là của riêng từng nước. Chứ còn đối với cả cái platform này của họ thì cung cấp 3 cái thông tin. Chính vì thế nên là vừa rồi đi một loạt các cái slide ấy, là nó gồm rất nhiều các cái lớp thông tin khác nhau. Đấy, gồm các cái lớp thông tin về các cái hiểm họa. Đấy, gồm có cả độ cao địa hình, rồi các cái yếu tố về địa chất vân vân, rồi thống kê lượng mưa, rồi tích hợp các cái số liệu dự báo radar, mô hình toàn cầu, mô hình khu vực. Rồi sau đấy thì là đến cái phần mà người ta ông ấy cũng nói về cái cách tính của người ta, tức là cũng vẫn dựa trên 3 cái yếu tố là cái R, cái risk là EVH này. 3 cái yếu tố đấy thì nó vẫn chung theo cái công thức đấy. Và cái website này thì là không gọi là thiết kế dưới dạng là web GIS và thời gian là gần thực. Một số yếu tố thì là cũng nó cũng là gần thực như là thời tiết, nhưng mà các yếu tố khác thì đa phần là cũng là bị trễ. Đấy. Thì đây là cái phần mới nhất, đây là cái giao diện của cái ứng dụng cảnh báo thiên tai của họ. Ở đây thì khi mà chọn các cái loại thiên tai khác nhau thì nó sẽ ra các cái vùng cảnh báo, đồng thời là có theo các cái dự báo theo thời gian, mỗi ngày sẽ có một cái bản đồ riêng. Hi Sean, you can keep going.
Oh, sure, thank you. All right, so I believe I have a couple more slides. So we're on to the dissemination part of the early warning process. So as Paul would have pointed out, through the Weather Ready Nations program, essentially a matrix, or I guess a series of matrices that have been developed to support impact-based forecasting for various hazards. So as I pointed out, part of the development of I guess part of the improvement, I should say, of the Caribbean Direction platform was supported through the Ready Nations program, specifically as it relates to this regulatory component for the determination of impact-based forecast. So it is something that is still in development, but hopefully by the time I complete the next few slides, you should get an idea of how we plan to move forward with it. So as I was pointing out, based on the hazard of interest, one would select the area where you expect to have the impact. And the color coordination is based on the matrix, which you would have seen Paul present, where you have colors ranging from green to red, and the color indicates the risk level. So the combination of likelihood and potential impact for any of the hazards would be associated with a color, and that color would be associated with a certain risk level, whether it be high, medium, low, or very low. And for each risk level, there is a response associated with it. So the map and the table are very much linked. Paul did a good job of going through what the actual impact matrix may look like. He provided an example for wind. Here I provided an example for rainfall, but similarly to what was presented by Paul, it's broken down in terms of minimal impact, minor, significant, and severe. So this is where the expected impacts for various sectors, for example, or various types of impacts are populated. And similarly, for each potential impact level, you have an associated response, whether it be very low, low, medium, or high. And the language is populated in the matrix that should be used for each potential response. So therefore, if one sees a map like this, for example, each color for each polygon has this impact associated with it, as well as a response. Being able to share the information with the public provides a way of getting information out. So how is that done? Well, it can be done through a bulletin. So the web alert application itself has the facility to provide a bulletin. Essentially, that is a PDF document that can be shared via various means. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is through the Common Alerting Protocol, more familiarly known as CAP. So this is kind of where we're doing some testing, where we're trying to integrate impact-based forecasts with a CAP type workflow. I mean, there are challenges along the way, given the amount of information that's usually associated with the impact-based forecast and the limitations of CAP in terms of a delivery mechanism. But we believe we're making some progress. CAP is very powerful in terms of how you can disseminate information to multiple persons using a variety of methodologies, whether it be radio interrupt, television interrupt, SMS, so on and so forth. So it enables people to be reached through various mechanisms. So what you're seeing is a mock-up of the Barbados CAP server and how we started this integration process where the polygons that you would have seen previously are integrated into a CAP formatted file to be shared using that protocol. And similarly, we are aware that not everyone has access to a CAP server, for example, but using the same protocol, one can establish a dynamic web page or a dynamic application that reads the XML file produced by WebAlert, typically a CAP XML file, and enable the dissemination of the information through a web page, for example. So rather than using a CAP specific server, the information can be shared via a simple web page where a user may come in and based on his area of interest, whether it be a sector, a particular location, for example, the impact-based forecast can be broken down so that he or she would get specifically information that he or she may need for their particular application. So if you know you are looking for a potential impact on agriculture, for example, the web page will allow you to essentially extract out the impacts that you would have formulated in your impact table that are specifically related to agriculture, rather than giving everyone all the information. You're kind of tailoring the information. You're tailoring the information to the persons based on their particular sector or interest. Given that the impact-based forecast matrix tends to contain a lot of information, we try to help or support persons in terms of being able to provide them with exactly the information they may need to make a decision, rather than having to search through too much information to pull out exactly what's relevant to them. So you kind of see that as a way, this as a way of facilitating that. So there's work to be done. It's not quite finished yet. This year we had some delays due to the current global situation, but hopefully by next year we should be able to wrap this up, especially for Barbados, and perhaps expand it throughout the Caribbean. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please share, and I will do my best to try to answer them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. So, anh chị xem có câu hỏi thì có thể hỏi. Đây ông vừa giới thiệu thêm về cái phần các cái truyền tin thì nó liên quan đến cái giao diện cảnh báo chung, giao thức cảnh báo chung, cái CAP ấy. Thì cái này Việt Nam mình cũng đang chuẩn bị triển khai ở chỗ phòng dự báo thời tiết, nó liên quan cái gọi là cái smart alert mà chúng ta dự kiến được chuyển giao từ Phần Lan. Thì sau này chúng ta cũng sẽ có cái đấy. Thì các anh chị xem có câu hỏi gì không? Sean, I have a question. So can you go back to your last slide?
One second, sorry.
So I see it's in your web alert. The previous one.
Just have a minute, stop.
No, the second last one.
This one?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
No, next one. No, yes. So what I see in here is that the right one is the information pop up when we click on the left image for the red area, right?
Right. So essentially, the way we envision it working is that on the left image, when you hover over any of the polygons, it would provide a link, whether it be high rain hazard or what have you. And then once that is accessed, then you have the ability to break it down further based on the sector or the area of interest.
Okay.
But I mean, this is not the final version. It's very much still in development.
Yeah.
But hopefully you get the idea.
But when I see that you have a lot of stakeholders there, from agriculture to like school and hospital, and a lot of messages. like instruction to what they should do. So are those information like automatically generate, or the forecaster needs to type in those warning?
Right. So good question. So if you remember the matrix that would have been shared by both Paul and myself, the idea really is to have that information already coded. So any background wants a certain combination um, of of impact as well as um, the
Response.
not necessarily response. If we go back here, so essentially once a combination of impact and likelihood is chosen and the risk level is known, the specific information in the impact or and response table can be accessed and extracted and put together in a file essentially, which is pushed to the web page. So essentially it's very much automatic. However, one could imagine a scenario where the forecaster may want to adjust the information that's being sent out. So that facility also will need to be considered. But the idea is to kind of make it as seamless as possible, so that to avoid the forecaster from having to type up or type in too much information, but perhaps being able to edit certain lines to maybe include some specific information. In terms of descriptions, more than likely, you wouldn't probably find as many descriptions in the future. It'll probably just be limited to sectors. But this was a very early version of what we were trying to do. So there have been some changes since then. But the point is being able to separate out the information based on sectors. So in this particular example, you have the impact on agriculture, and then the instructions for related to that particular impact. But as I say, there's still some work to be done. It's not an operational product as yet, but hopefully you get the idea.
Thanks, Joseph. Another question about whether you have any investigation on the public, how to say, the public requirement before you publish the information on your website.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't quite catch it.
He want to ask a question about like before you publish those warning on your website, did you do any like survey on the user requirement?
Okay, I understand the question now. So I guess there are kind of two parts to the question. As part of the Ready Nations program, as it relates to the language being used in the matrices, there would have been stakeholder sessions that would have been held with Met Services, the Met Service, the Disaster Management Agency, as well as other sectors. So the actual information on the language used for impacts and responses would have been shared, and actual starting point would have been agreed. Is knowing that perhaps the language will need to be modified going forward as the process unfolds. We don't see it as being a static process, so there will be need for some more collaboration to kind of make sure that everyone's interest is considered. The other part to it is that, as I had pointed out in the beginning, the CIMH is not a forecasting office, so we really can't issue any alert or warning on behalf of any country. However, we can develop tools for them to use to support what they may want to do. So the idea is really to develop a tool that can be used by the Met Services if they so choose to inform the public. So not really for us to decide whether we think language is appropriate. We would defer any queries, concerns on the language to the various net services and try to accommodate them where possible in terms of how they want to see the application being used. So I kind of hope that answers your question.
Yes, thanks Sean. I think it's okay, it's good. Ở đây ông nói là ngay cả cái việc mà các cái câu text ở trong này thì đều là phải là có sự thỏa thuận và trao đổi thống nhất giữa cơ quan ký tượng, phòng nhân tai và các bộ ngành khác. Đấy, tức là các cái khuyến cáo ở dưới kia đều là khi mà chúng ta xây dựng các cái bảng hóa trận đấy là chúng ta đều phải thống nhất các cái đấy. Thì cái này nó sẽ là ra automatic. Là khi cảnh báo như nào thì tất cả các cái cảnh báo hướng dẫn kia là sẽ là automatic. Thế còn các bộ ngành hoặc đơn khác mà muốn có thông tin chi tiết hơn thì lại có khuyến cáo riêng. Còn cái khuyến cáo này nó gần như khuyến cáo ban đầu thôi. Và nó là khuyến cáo chung, một khuyến cáo gọi là đã được thống nhất từ trước của các đơn vị phòng thiên tai để khi mà có thiên tai xảy ra chúng ta đưa ra các khuyến cáo ban đầu như thế này.
Hỏi nó sẽ đánh giá cái chất lượng của nó, chất lượng của nó.
Đánh giá phần sau, cái ông ấy sẽ nói về phần đánh giá. Okay, thanks Sean. Thank you for very informative presenter. Yeah, we also
thank you very much.
Common alert protocol soon, but at the moment we still like organizing our staff to make sure that we have a very good message to the public before we can do it in operational work.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks.
Over to you, Sam.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sean. That was great. Lots of very useful information you've given us there. So thank you so much for all the preparation you've done to bring this to us. And now, just before I call the next speaker, I think I would like to point out, you brought up the question of CAP, the Common Alerting Protocol, and there was a response from LAM. Just to point out, you would recall that our director, Johan Stader, actually gave us a challenge that we do something about CAP for Vietnam. He has also asked me on the side that we have a presentation on CAP. So I'll be talking to someone else, Mr. Surreal from WMO, and see what time we might be able to fix this. Right now, I'm looking at it, and I think Thursday, during the self-guided session, you could have a 30-minute break and have a presentation from him in the afternoon. Afternoon in Vietnam. So anyway, we'll talk about that. Otherwise, thanks, Sean. I'd now like to come back to Paul. And Paul will be presenting a case study on impact-based forecasting exercise, an IBF WS case study to develop an impact-based message and warning. Over to you, Paul.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Sam. Yeah, so let's see here, I'll share. So what we'd like to do now is go through a case study. Actually, this is one of the case studies we used as we practiced impact-based forecasting implementation in Barbados. And I just want to recognize that this case was actually developed by Sean, who just spoke, and his colleague Kathy Ann Caesar. So they put together this case study that helped us practice impact-based forecasting on Barbados. All right, just as a case study overview, this case study was an actual event that occurred back in November 29th, 2016. So it 4 years ago, it just happened. This happens to be the time of the 50th anniversary of independence celebrated on the island of Barbados. And during this time, there's a high-impact tropical rainfall event that is being observed in the Caribbean. And what I've done in the case is highlighted where Barbados is. So here's the map shows the whole Caribbean area, and then Barbados is on the eastern side of that, and then the high-impact event is to the west and north in this image, this satellite image. So what we want to do in this case study, so this will be your assignment after I go through kind of the case overview, is prepare a forecast as if you were a forecaster in Barbados, looking at the observations, the forecasts, come up with the hazards, what kind of risk and what response that you would issue, and then you would prepare the impact response to the emergency managers on the island. So here's kind of a zoomed in or a wide scale and zoomed in map. So here's in the United States, and then we're focusing on this part of the Caribbean. So kind of a zoomed in view. So you have Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and then the Eastern Islands, and then Barbados is down here to the eastern part that's marked by the red, kind of the red dot there. So as I mentioned, you'll be the forecasters for the Barbados Met Service, and you need to provide a forecast of the possibility of the hazardous impact to Barbados for the Independence Day on the 29th of November. If you look at the initial three-day forecast, 3 days before the event, all the models, everything show that there would be no significant weather for the independence celebrations. So if you look at your 3-day forecast risk matrix, you'd say the likelihood of any impacts would be low, which is indicated by the X in the lower left of the risk matrix. Just as a reference, Sean just showed this earlier, but these are the different areas, different parishes, different regions of the island itself. And this is somewhat of a busy slide, but showing the map synopsis of the weather at that time. There's basically a surface low pressure disturbance that has formed in the Eastern Caribbean, and with a trough that's to the west of Barbados, which is again indicated by the blue star on the map. Unusually strong area of convection has moved from the Caribbean Sea, and now is producing heavy rainfall over the west part of Barbados.
So can I have a short?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah. Ở đây thì trong phần này thì ông sẽ nói về một cái gọi là case study cho ngày dự báo cái ngày 50 năm ngày quốc khánh của Barbados. Đấy thì đây thì nhiệm vụ của chúng ta là sẽ phải đưa ra cái cảnh báo về thời tiết nguy hiểm ở khu vực này cho cái lễ kỷ niệm đấy. Đấy thì ông đi sâu ra mấy bản đồ thì là Barbados nằm ở phần phía đông của cái khu vực biển Caribe. Và cái dự báo của 3 ngày trước thì sẽ cho thấy là cái ma trận màu xanh trên kia là cái dấu X nó nằm ở phía dưới cùng, tức là gần như là không có xác suất xảy ra cái thời tiết nguy hiểm. Đấy, còn trong cái bản đồ thời tiết ngày trước, trong cái ngày đấy thì chúng ta nhận thấy rằng là nó lại có cái rãnh thấp ở ngay phần phía tây bắc của khu vực Barbados đấy. Đấy, và bây giờ thì đến là đây là cái phần về cái bản đồ thiên khí. Yes, you can keep going, Paul.
Okay, thank you. So the local radio sounding for Barbados is given here, and it shows that there's a lot of moisture in the atmosphere, and there's potential for significant rainfall. So in terms of looking at the satellite imagery of the event, for early in the morning of the day of the Independence Day, there's a strong area in the map. The satellite imagery shows there's this strong area of showers and thunderstorms that moves across the eastern Caribbean islands. The heaviest activity is to the islands just to the west of that line, and the activity is supported by an upper level trough that's helping support this event. We've provided a forecast output of the precipitation that's expected for the area. This is something that Sean and his colleagues have generated using the regional forecast system or forecast system, and the forecast is indicating that anywhere from 100 to 350 millimeters in rainfall can be expected to the north and west of Barbados based on this forecast. And they do have a pretty good weather radar network in the Caribbean. So here's just a snapshot image, a composite of radar reflectivity showing the storm activity in the region, and you see a kind of a west to east line of convection, again to the north and east of Barbados. And when you go through the case study, there's forecast discussions or surface charts that are available on those links. And, so everybody should have access to this presentation to help with the case study. You can go there and you can see what the U.S. National Hurricane Center was issuing for the tropical weather discussion and so on. So you can get a feel of what's expected based on the forecast. Then going through a little bit farther in the day, you see that this is mid-morning, right before the celebration is expected to start in the afternoon. So you see that again the system has moved over the islands, is moving toward Barbados, again indicated by that yellow star, and you can then again link. You can go to those links and see the updates and the discussions for that time. And then the forecast from the WRF forecast, the regional forecast from CMIH, is indicating that the showers and activity will remain over the islands for the next 48 hours. So that's the kind of the forecast of precipitation. So the assignment for this case study, this simulation, is you will want to use the risk matrix to come up with what's the likelihood of flooding or other possible impacts to the island, and then what is the potential impacts of flooding or other impacts to the island. Is it going to be minimal, minor, significant, or severe? So you first want to, in the assignment, to determine this, and then if so, will Barbados, the island, be impacted by hazards? And if so, what are the different hazards? And what you could do, if you have the PowerPoint, you can actually move these around and kind of indicate where you might see thunderstorms or flooding or high winds, things like this. Here's the different colors for indicating your hazards, hazard levels. So just as here's just kind of the summary of the assignment for the impact and response exercise. What I thought you can do, I'm just looking at all the participants in the room, that maybe you can break out into 3 or 4 teams and then develop the following forecast and impact statements. So what you want to do is be a forecaster and write a 12-hour forecast for Barbados, and then develop a messaging, a response to the managers on the possible impacts in response, impacts in response for that Independence Day celebration. So you want to make sure that you provide that information if they should go forward with the Independence Day, should delay it, should cancel it, and that's what you should do. And then, Sam, I'm not sure how much time we have for this, but then at the end of the exercise, the different groups can then go through and tell everybody what they came up with their forecast and what was their messaging that they came up with for this exercise.
Thank you, Paul. You wanted to know what about time.
Yeah.
That's a good thing you've done, because looks like we are really short of time today.
So can I have a suggestion, please?
Yes.
So how about I can ask participant here to do it like in the afternoon, and maybe do it on the PowerPoint slide, like the one on the link, and then we can send it back through email. So then we can check and make a discussion by tomorrow. Is that okay?
In the afternoon, we have some important work that is put, and it's also going to take time, and that is okay. There is a Barbados video. Maybe that one can be watched later. There's something to read and some exercises to do. How about overrunning today a bit? Is that possible? If I may talk to Grace. Grace?
Yep.
How tightly are you committed today? Would you be able to overrun a bit?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's fine. Okay, I would suggest that we go on, and then I don't know whether you can have a 10-minute break, because I'm sure everybody is very tired. Just to take your coffee and come and sit.
Okay.
And then we just go on. Since we can overrun, I can overrun. I don't have a problem here. If you can overrun, can you?
Yes.
We can go beyond 12:30. Okay, fine. At your own time, Lam, you can release the group for 10 minutes and then they come back. Do you think this is a good time, or you want to do it later?
So you mean we need to do it now, and then
We can go ahead and do it now. Yes, because afternoon will be very, for you, will be very tight. We have some we have a lot of stuff for the afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we do it before or after break?
It depends. Are you tired? You can take a break.
Okay. I think maybe.
Then we take a short break and then come back. Then we continue with Grace.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah. So maybe I will ask them like 10 minutes to do this exercise, and then we have break.
Well, maybe not 10. You might need more than 10 minutes.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll leave you now.
Sam, could we maybe have a compromise? They can work on the exercise now, and then we can just have like a 10-15 minute discussion tomorrow morning, just to go through what they came up with, just so there's a little more time on both ends.
Yes, that's okay. That's a very good suggestion, because tomorrow you have 1 hour for question and answer. I think that we can have. Yeah, very good.
That sounds great. And
yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. Okay.
What I'll do is I'll just be online here. If you have questions, just please ask me. And as you go through the exercise, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. So we can have like 20 minutes. Then we have a 10-minute break, and then we start with Grace. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Thì anh chị sẽ làm bài, tức là cho mở cái file PowerPoint ra, thì trong này nó sẽ có như ông Paul vừa hướng dẫn ấy, thì là nó sẽ có các cái phân tích của Mỹ này, có các bản đồ, so sánh các bản đồ này. Đấy, sau đấy thì chúng ta sẽ phải làm cái bài tập ở cái slide số 13. Đấy, tức là gì, là ở đây thì anh chị sẽ 13 và 14. Đấy, thì sau khi xem xét tất cả các cái ảnh mây vệ tinh, ảnh radar trong đấy này, rồi thì các cái phân tích của Mỹ này và so sánh các bản đồ thời tiết, thì chúng ta sẽ phải dự báo cho cái khu vực ngôi sao màu xanh đấy. Đấy, để xem là cái khả năng xảy ra mưa rồi lũ như ở đấy như làm sao, cái tác động sẽ như thế nào. Và trong cái slide số 14 thì các anh chị sẽ kéo các cái biểu tượng thời tiết tương ứng vào cái từng cái khu vực của Barbados đấy. Và cuối cùng thì là chúng ta sẽ phải viết một cái dự báo thời tiết 12 giờ tới cho khu vực đấy và khuyến cáo cho cái lễ kỷ niệm Quốc khánh. Đấy, thì chúng ta sẽ có 20 phút làm, sau đó thì quay trở lại thì chúng ta sẽ nói tóm được thôi, là có thể chỉ kết luận ở cái câu cuối cùng như là chúng ta sẽ dự báo thời tiết như nào và khuyến cáo ra làm sao có hủy, có hoãn hay không cái lễ kỷ niệm đấy. Rồi sau đó chúng ta sẽ có 10 phút nghỉ giải lao và quay trở lại với cái bài giảng tiếp theo. Hôm nay chúng ta sẽ nghỉ muộn khoảng 12 rưỡi theo lịch, là 12 rưỡi. Đấy, chúng ta vẫn làm theo nhóm vậy. Nhóm hôm qua chúng ta như nào về chúng ta duy trì cái nhóm đấy và có 20 phút để làm bài tập này.
Hello. Hello, Lam, are you there? Somebody can help us with some photographs? Photographs. Hello? Okay. Hello? Hi, Lam. Welcome back.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like I'm there with you.
Sorry?
I feel like I'm there with you. Gives me that feeling, yeah.
Hopefully
So-
one day we can. Sorry. Mọi người ngồi vào đi ạ. Ôi kia.
So is it progressing well? Did it? Do you think we can break here and then, or do you have questions for Paul?
Okay, I asked them. Anh chị đã sẵn sàng trao đổi chưa ạ? Hoặc là có cái câu hỏi gì thì có thể hỏi trước, sau đó thì trao đổi sau. Có câu hỏi nào không ạ?
Khó bởi vì cái chỗ mình có rất nhiều chỗ khác, ở chỗ mình khác thì
Không, họ cho anh dự báo rồi mà.
Cái vùng của họ chỉ có một xíu thôi, nhưng mà cái bản đồ mưa thì quá to.
Còn dự báo được thủ đô của Barbados là nó nằm ở phía nào của Barbados?
Dự báo thoải mái đi.
Nó bé như là cái bắt mũi này.
Của em là cái dự báo là nó nằm ở phía đông của Barbados.
Không, tức là zoom bản đồ nó to thế thôi, thực ra cái điểm của nó rất bé. Cái đảo một chút một đảo như kiểu cồn cỏ của mình ấy.
Đây là bản đồ của nó còn đúng không? Nhưng mà ý của em hỏi là
đấy thì anh nhấp các
cái báo là nằm ở phía đông.
4 cái hiện tượng đấy, anh nhấp vào bản đồ
Để hỏi
mới được cái nhận ra thời tiết. Có mưa không mưa là màu vàng hay màu cam đấy.
Okay, they just have a question.
Yes.
So where is the location for the Independence Day ceremony? So on what side of the Barbados? North, south, east, west, or where?
It would be on the south side of the island, southwest side.
Southwest. Okay.
Yep.
Excuse me, Lam. Excuse me.
Okay, we have the result. So one representative can explain the forecast and recommendation. If that's okay.
Do you think we can do it because of time? Because we need we have two presentations from Grace. Do you think we can do that in the morning tomorrow? Or what do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I think maybe that would be better if it was tomorrow morning, so they maybe they can work on it tomorrow if they have an afternoon, and then we have a more larger discussion in the morning, and then we can go on to Grace's presentation.
Is that okay?
So the reason is that we have take a short break already.
Okay.
So that means we can go straight away to Grace's presentation. So that's why I suggest just maybe short discussion about just one group.
Okay.
To discuss about the forecast and recommendation.
Can we say that we allow ourselves up to quarter two, sorry, the next 15 minutes?
I think just 5 minutes, because I think
okay.
I just have one group to present.
Okay, very well. Thank you. Go ahead.
Rồi, mọi người sẽ tự, bởi vì là khi mọi người nói chuyện nó sẽ rất là dễ vào cái mic này.
Okay. After analysis of the weather system in Barbados, we think if the fire forecast point is south-southwest, I think you should organize the meeting because if this place have a heavy rainfall, thunderstorm, and maybe high stuff. About the likelihood, I think it's high, and about the flood and slack line impact, I think it's a level of significant. Okay, that's all.
So do you get that, Paul?
Yes. Yeah. I guess the question I have is, what would be the message for the celebration? Should it be delayed, canceled, continue, based on your forecast?
Cái lời khuyên là gì, là cho cái ceremony delay hay cancel hay là cancel. So they say it's cancel because the impact is significant, and
I think you should delay because after 2 days later, maybe the weather is review.
Okay. And maybe another option is that we can delay in 2 days.
Okay. No, that sounds like a great forecast messaging there. You did, that was very good.
Có nhóm nào? Any other group want to present? No. Yeah, I think that maybe we can have more discussion about this tomorrow morning, and now we can move to another presentation.
That sounds great.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Ram, for coordinating this from Vietnam. And I see everybody is very active on it. It's very nice. Paul, thanks for this. So we continue tomorrow morning. Now I'd like to introduce Grace Reg, from she's the operations lead meteorologist in the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia. Grace has worked for the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia as an operational meteorologist since 2013. She has worked with the Northern Territory Office as a duty forecaster before joining the Extreme Weather Desk, National Operations as she now works as an operations lead meteorologist for national production. And Grace will be presenting, she has 2 presentations. The first one is impact-based forecast Australian case study. You had already watched this video yesterday. Was it yesterday? Yes, yesterday, during the self-directed session. And then there'll be another presentation on understanding the role of various data sources of information when collecting and verifying impact data. Grace, welcome.
Thank you for that. I'll just quickly share my screen. So hopefully you'll be able to receive that in a second. Yep, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see
Excellent. So this is basically a follow-on from yesterday's video that you would have watched. So we're looking now a bit more at sort of how Australia approached impact forecasting. We have done it slightly differently to how other countries have, and just going in a little bit more depth into how we've done it and how we assess impact forecasting. So it'll be a bit of a recap on what our national hazard outlook is, which is our first product that we have created in the impact space. We'll go on to how to use our rubric approach, which is how we differ from the other agencies, and using rubrics for other assessments as well. And then looking a little bit more about other ways that we've sort of made specific rubrics for certain things. Followed by just the next steps that we are taking in this space, and hopefully a little bit of time for questions at the end. So this is just the recap from the information yesterday. Opposed to most countries, we went for what's called a rubric over a table, and we have the same rubric no matter what our hazard is. So unlike other ones that have a very specific table per hazard, we went for a one-size-fits-all approach. Where we basically just listed what is vulnerable in terms of our community we're talking about, what is vulnerable to any weather hazard, and then you rank each of those vulnerabilities to whatever the event is that's happening between 0 and 3, add them all up, and then you get a rating, a tiered rating from basically low to extreme. So we went for this approach of, instead of just doing specific to a hazard, doing a one-size-fits-all. We felt it worked a bit better for our country with the size that we are. We also felt it worked a little bit better because of the multi-hazard approach as well. It doesn't matter if I'm assessing just damaging winds or if I'm assessing damaging winds and heavy rainfall at the same time. You can still use the same table. It just increases or decreases depending. Then, of course, there's the other side, which is the probability, which you need to make your overall matrix. So our probability, we're mainly looking at how certain we are of that forecast, taking into account model guidance and consistency, where we are in that forecast periods and sort of other scenarios that could potentially happen. And then this is the product that we make. So it's a 3-page product. The first page is just a sort of overview of it. It is an outlook product. We're not in the warning space yet. So it's just a breakdown of the next 4 days, the events that are happening. We use the same colors as most of the other agencies use, with yellow being our be prepared, orange take action, and red is basically a hazard emergency. We would probably consider the yellow, orange, and red to all be similar to a warning threshold. So if we were in a warning space, we would warn off yellow, not just off orange and red. So that is another slight difference. And then we have the breakdown of each day where each hazard's given its assessment in the matrix, and we actually go into what are the impacts expected from each event. So there you have the breakdown of the detailed impacts expected. And this is just an example from the end of last year doing our fire weather season. So now I'm going to go through 2 events that happened in Australia and how we assessed using the same hazard rubric, how we assessed it differently for each of these ones. So the first event is thunderstorms with damaging winds. So I picked one of the models there. So that's the broad area that we're going with that day, just that's the ensemble for severe thunderstorms expected. This area is southern parts of, into Victoria, which is the state I live in. So it is still a quite highly populated area, not quite getting to our capital city though, which is Melbourne, which is just a bit further south of that painted area. And so how we would assess this, so I've got the information, have already talked to our sort of emergency services, got a pretty good idea of the vulnerabilities in the area and the years that we've had these sort of events. So basically we would move through. For example, we've got life, generally with something like a damaging winds, a borderline sort of area. We're going for pretty minimal danger to life. It's very rare that we do see any sort of deaths or major injuries from these events. It does happen, but it's such a low risk. So the vulnerability is really not there. Property, though, this sort of damaging events with thunderstorms, we are expecting localized damage to buildings and structures. We'd expect a little bit of disruptions to delivery of services and utilities, either localized or very brief, mostly due to trees falling on power lines. Increased demand for emergency services as trees do topple. They generally end up on roads or structures, so emergency, but not a high demand. Transport will generally just see brief delays of our roads, with some roads maybe being closed or at least having to go a bit slower. Day-to-day activities, there isn't much that's affected. No one's really changing their routine. Our schools aren't going to be closed, none of that. And then in terms of agriculture, that area is a populated agriculture area, and February is still in our summer, so they are still a bit of impact to those areas, and not too much in the way of land and vegetation. There will be some trees down, but it won't be that much of an impact coming from the trees themselves. And then we also have our exposure and duration. So population, we're expecting regional cities to be impacted, less likely to hit Melbourne itself. We're going for thunderstorms, so it's a pretty localized areas that will be impacted. We're not expecting a widespread cold front to come through. And then the duration themselves is generally thunderstorms don't last too long. So basically we go through each of those ones, add them all up. So when you add them all up, you get a rating of 7, which gives us a moderate. And then we have a couple of extra things that are called impact modifiers, which we basically use when we find that there are events that happen that may, or things that are happening that increase our vulnerability and exposure, but we don't know the exact amount it does. So that, for example, is if there's been previous severe weather through and the area hasn't yet recovered, which hadn't occurred in this stage, or holiday and travel periods when we expect a lot of people that are not used to that area around. So more people out and about, but also more tourists that are less knowledgeable of those sort of events and are less used to it, which we were in school holidays at that time. We still end up with an 8, which gives us a moderate impact, which was, if it was likely, would be putting us into that yellow scenario. Did you want me to pause there?
Sorry, Grace?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. I would like to do some translation because you gave a lot of. So can you come back to the previous slide? Yeah.
Yeah.
So does it mean that when you define an area of vulnerability with potential thunderstorm there, so you need to call to all the stakeholders in your list, in your rubric?
No, we have most of the information from what these sort of events will generally mean for their impacts. So we already have a general idea, and this will be done between us, and occasionally we'll get some insight from our national emergency services.
So it means you have the real-time database?
We don't have real-time data, but we have historic data. So we know that, I'm expecting severe thunderstorms with, say, wind gusts of 90 kilometers an hour. And when previously seen in those events in those sort of areas, we found that we ended up with this impact level.
Okay, I see. And it also depend on. So when you access the table. So what is the area you will identify? Because for your thunderstorm, you can have very large area or different area. It also depends on the movement of the thunderstorm cell.
Yeah.
And then I just wonder, like, how you can, because you define on the maximum wind speed, or
it's a combination of the two. You still have to know what your hazard is. So we still would only bother with the assessment if we were going for at least 90 kilometers an hour winds, because we have found that anything lower than that, we won't really see any impact. With something like this, we do need to take into account what sort of thunderstorm area we're looking at. this sort of setup would be pulse storms that may have severe gusts attached to them. We're not going for a supercell, say. So if it was a supercell and we're expecting, you know, much faster winds with it, or a more significant track, that would change probably the exposure for the area. Spatial exposure would be larger because the storms would last a lot longer. And also things like your damage to your property and your transport and agriculture would be more impacted. So then we'd up those assessments and recalculate it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I got it. So now I can do the translation for yeah. Rồi cái bài của cô này thì có mấy slide thôi nhưng mà nó rất là nhiều thông tin. Thì thứ nhất là cô là làm việc ở cơ quan khí tượng Úc, làm tại chỗ Northern Territory, thì tức là vùng nhiệt đới của Úc. Thì ở đây thì cô có hướng dẫn một cái cách làm tại cơ quan khí tượng Úc khi mà xác định cái tác động của một cái đợt giông. Đấy, thì đầu tiên thì sẽ là các cái thông tin về dự báo thời tiết thông thường như này, nhưng mà sau đấy thì khi mà đánh giá cái tác động ấy, thì ở BOM sẽ có một cái bảng, cái gọi là cái rubric như thế kia. Trong đấy sẽ có các cái đánh giá tác động cho từng đối tượng khác nhau. Các là cái cột bên tay trái ngoài cùng đây, cái phần bảng trên có 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cái đối tượng, và từng đối tượng một thì mình sẽ đánh giá cái mức độ tác động đến cái đối tượng đấy dựa vào các cái số liệu trong quá khứ và cái thông tin thời gian gần thực của các cái cơ sở dữ liệu mà họ có được. Và thông thường như họ nói là cơ quan khí tượng Úc sẽ liên hệ với cả bên giống như mình đây là phòng chống thiên tai để có được hết các thông tin cập nhật nhất. Thế sau đấy thì là họ lại đánh tích vào các cái ô, ví dụ đối với cả cái cuộc sống hàng ngày của xã hội chẳng hạn thì nó là low này, rồi đối với cả các cái nhà cửa thì là moderate, thì low là điểm số là 0, moderate là 1, 2, 3 tương ứng với cả các cái điểm. Thế thì khi đi dọc theo từng cái đối tượng chịu tác động như thế thì cái thì 0, cái thì 1 cộng lại thì ở cái phần phía trên tác động là được 5 điểm. Đấy, 5 điểm cái bảng trên mọi người đếm ở cái tích xanh ở cái hàng moderate ấy, ở cái cột moderate thì nó được 5 tích, tức là 5 điểm. Thì sau đấy họ lại đánh giá thêm cái exposure nữa, cái thời gian nó tồn tại. Đấy, ở đây thì nó gồm có là gì, là population exposure là cái số người bị ảnh hưởng, sau đó thì là cái không gian phạm vi ảnh hưởng và cái exposure theo thời gian. Đấy. Thế thì khi mà đánh giá theo thêm cái exposure thì nó sẽ lại tăng thêm điểm nữa. Tức là ví dụ như là với cả các cái đợt mà xảy ra ngắn dưới 3 giờ, các cái thiên tai xảy ra ngắn dưới 3 giờ thì đều là 0 điểm hết, tức là không bị cộng thêm rủi ro, không bị tăng thêm. Nhưng mà từ 3 đến 12 giờ thì cộng 1, 12 đến 24 cộng 2 và trên 24 giờ là cộng 3. Thì khi cộng tất cả các điểm trên này vào thì người ta trong cái phiên dự báo này thì sẽ được là 7 điểm. Và 7 điểm khi tra vào cái thang của Úc thì người ta sẽ ra được là từ 6 đến 12 thì là cái tác động này là moderate. Đấy là cái rubric để người ta dùng để đánh giá cái tác động. Thì cái cách làm này nó cụ thể hơn mà nó có vẻ nó dễ hiểu hơn nhiều so với cả những cái bài giảng trước. Đánh giá từng đối tượng một sau đó cộng vào, nhưng hôm qua cái bài cô gì nói rằng là mình chỉ nói đến cái đối tượng rủi ro cao nhất thôi, đúng không? Thì ở đây là từng cái một cứ đánh giá riêng này từng cái sau đó cộng lại thì sẽ ra điểm khi tra vào bảng sẽ ra cái mức độ tác động. Okay, thanks, Greg. You can keep going.
Thank you. So using the same rubric and assessment, this is now an assessment on a tropical cyclone. So this was what is our category 3, which is equivalent to a typhoon for you guys. So this was one of the severe tropical cyclones from the start of this year. We were expecting destructive winds, heavy rainfall, and storm surge with it. So using the same rubric, we can still do an assessment, even though they're very different hazards and systems. So for this time, we're expecting a moderate risk to life. Areas up there are very used to it, so all the buildings are to code. So the risk is pretty low, and it's more in the flooding that's making the risk. It's also not a very populated area, so overall there is some risk to life, but it is only in that sort of moderate range. Property, though, we are expecting with something like this, we would be forecasting widespread damage to buildings and structures through the area when you do have such a large system coming through. Widespread disruptions to services and utilities. We are expecting power outages that would probably be quite significant. for multiple days. Emergency services, it's still only moderate up there just because of the population level. There isn't a huge amount of people living there, so the emergency services demand is still probably moderate towards that high end, but we went for the moderate assessment on that. Transport, we were expecting major transport routes to be cut because there would be flooding in that area, and there is only one major road in and out of most of those towns. So once they're cut, they are cut off now. Day-to-day activity, we were expecting prolonged disruptions to schools and workplaces as they would all be closed. Agriculture, not too much up there, so it was pretty localized damage to some areas that are a couple of farms up there, but overall, most of the agriculture is not in that area. We are looking at northern parts of Western Australia. And then in terms of land and vegetation, we'd expect some trees down and coastal erosion. The lucky thing for that area is that while we are expecting storm surge, there is a 7 to 8 meter tidal range. So really depends what time it was coming in, and luckily for us, it wasn't expected to be high tide. So that's in terms of population, we are going for rural towns. Karratha is the largest town in that area that was like to be impacted. It has around 16,000 people living there. So still a reasonable size, but not as much of an impact if it was hitting something like our regional or capital city. Spatial exposure, multiple districts being really impacted. It is a more widespread event, and in terms of the duration, we were expecting the cyclone itself to head through in about 12 to 24 hours all up. So that gets us, when you add it all up, 17. And then in terms of the impact modifiers, so anything added to that, at the time, there'd been no impacts from the severe weather season up there, so there was no recovery ongoing, and the school holidays had actually just finished for Western Australia then as well. So they were just sitting at that high mark, but that is using exactly the same rubric as the previous one. We end up with what would be our high, which is what we would assess this for. That extreme level is more for events like if this was hitting a capital city or was a category 5 system hitting the same area. It's more of those events that only happen a couple of times a year for our country. So something like the bushfires from this season were our extreme event basically for the year. So that's the sort of higher tier. So 17 and high is pretty much what we expected and what we verified at as well. As mentioned, we actually use this rubric approach for other things in forecasting. And so we actually made an operational impacts rubric, which is the same idea, but we basically use it to plan our staffing needs for the upcoming weather for the next week. And so we actually just look at, are we going to be required, how much staff, are we going to need extra briefings to emergency services in the government? And what is our increased media workload as well? So we actually assess this on a day-to-day basis so we can forward plan our staff levels basically for the week. So as mentioned, we use it in different ways now. And during the COVID pandemic, a separate rubric was created to assess our overall risk due to COVID, which fed into things like our incident management and Bureau's response. And then the other thing we're looking at is, in a sense, going a bit more towards hazard-specific rubric, which is mainly for one reason only, and there's only one thing we really want to move it to, which is basically when we created the original rubric, in our minds we had more meteorological events in mind. So looking at, your time frames, you're only looking at hours to at most a day or so. It doesn't really fit in for hydrology and flood forecasting in Australia. So at the bottom of the rubric, if you remembered, when it comes to the duration, it caps out at 24 hours. Our floods can last months. So it just doesn't work. It's not the same sort of event type. So we actually looked at doing a specific rubric approach for hydrology and flooding. So this is the first one that we started doing. It's this first test to see if it actually does work. And if we want to go to this way of doing hazard-specific rubrics, which we're not completely sure of, but we think it would work very well for flood, as it is quite different in terms of meteorological events. And so yes, that's the first one we've done. The other things we are looking at as well is creating more rubrics specific to one industry. So taking one of the rows out of it, for example, transport on that, and actually making a rubric that looks specifically at all of our transport and the impacts to them. That would then, of course, just feed into our one line. So there are different ways of sort of doing that. And then that's the rest of the flood one, as mentioned, the exposure and duration were the main ones we really had to change for that duration, is they decided that it should start at 2 days and end up over 2 weeks. So that's the main sort of difference. And then the other things that we are looking, of course, we are wanting to move towards impact-based warnings.
Right.
Yep.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Yeah. Can I do a translation, please?
Yep.
Okay. Vậy thì phần tiếp theo là cô giới thiệu thêm mấy cái nữa. Thì một cái là liên quan đến đánh giá về cái tác động do bão. Thì nó cũng tương đương như cái trường hợp trước là do dông. Thì tuy nhiên lúc trước cho dông thì tôi nói thiếu một cái ý là cái impact modifier ấy. Tức là ngoài cái việc mà xem cái exposure, người ta nói thêm cái modifier, tức là nếu mà cái khu vực đấy mà đã chịu ảnh hưởng của thiên tai mà đang trong giai đoạn khắc phục thì cũng sẽ phải cộng thêm điểm. Thì đấy, cái phía dưới này đây, đấy, hoặc là cái khu vực này là khu vực mà đang trong kỳ nghỉ lễ hay là trong giai đoạn mà học sinh đi học vân vân, là cũng được đánh giá để tăng thêm điểm. Đấy thì đấy là một cái phần ý nữa. Với cả bão thì là họ cũng đánh giá như vừa rồi là được ra là con số là 17. Thế ngoài ra thì cơ quan khí tượng Úc cũng làm thêm các cái rubric cho các cái hoạt động khác. Trong đấy có cái là gì là bản thân làm cái rubric cho bom. Đấy, tức là gì là khi mà có cái thời tiết nguy hiểm đấy thì người ta sẽ đánh giá xem là nó cái tác động đến hoạt động của cơ quan khí tượng Úc như nào. Trong đấy có việc là ra tần suất bản tin tăng lên này, số thực hiện các cái phỏng vấn với media tăng lên này, vân vân. Thì cái đấy cũng người ta cũng làm riêng một cái bản cho tác động đến các hoạt động của cơ quan khí tượng Úc để xem là tình huống nào thì là cần phải huy động bao nhiêu người, các thứ vân vân, là ảnh hưởng đến mức độ nào. Cái thứ ba nữa là họ làm là cho thủy văn. Thì cái cơ quan khí tượng Úc thì lại thuần túy là không có thủy văn, cho nên là lần đầu tiên họ làm cho cái thủy văn. Khi mà có một cái hiện tượng hay một cái đợt lũ thì họ cũng đánh giá xem là với cái lũ như thế thì là tác động đến các cái nào cũng riêng, tức là các cái tire cho từng cái thiên tai thì lại khác nhau, dông khác, bão khác, lũ lại khác. Đấy. Và họ nói rằng là cái này thì có thể áp dụng cho cả các cái lĩnh vực khác, hoặc là sẽ làm theo một hướng khác, đấy là gì là làm cho từng quận huyện, từng thành phố một. Đấy, bởi vì trong mỗi một thành phố thì nó lại có các cái tác động khác nhau, có các cái chỉ số khác nhau, và cái mức độ, tức là cái đánh giá theo thang điểm cho các thành phố và các tỉnh là cũng khác nhau. Thì đấy cũng là cái hướng mà cô nói là có thể là chúng ta cũng thể ứng dụng. Okay, thanks, Gray. You can keep going.
Thank you. And so, as mentioned, we of course want to end up at impact-based warnings. It's where we want to head. At the moment, we are still just in that outlook phase. So at the moment, we have something called our future warning services, which is basically goals that we are doing over the next few years to develop into that. So we want to first start by adopting an Australian total warning system, which is basically with the Bureau and all other government departments that do warnings. So whether it be health or weather, you would have the same sort of levels and the same, it would be much more familiar rather than being very different depending on which department you're handling. So everything sort of falling under the umbrella of Australian warnings. We want to, of course, head towards a bit more best practice warnings. At the moment, some of our warning services haven't been upgraded in a very long time, so we need to make sure all of them are at the same sort of level. Move towards a 3-level warning system, which would be those colors of yellow, orange, and red, and then head towards making sure they all are impact-based warnings. So it's still a lot to do. Some warnings will move towards a more qualitative approach if possible, and where sort of science allows. So some will be more based on ensemble data and actually coming more out of the models. Others, though, that we just don't have the data or the vulnerabilities in that level of detail, will be much more of a subjective approach, which is that rubric approach we're going with. So it will be a combination of sort of going more qualitative for those that we can and have the data and the partnerships with, and then remaining a little bit more subjective as we do with the rubric approach. and I'll leave some time for questions.
Yes, thank you, Grace. Xong anh chị xem có câu hỏi được không ạ?
Em có câu hỏi xin đó là tương những cái chỉ tiêu mà ở trong cái rubric thầy vô ấy, thì khi mà họ cho điểm thì có tiêu chuẩn nào đó để đến điểm không, hay là dựa vào năng lực và kinh nghiệm của các giáo viên?
Ok, cái này thì chắc cũng giống như cái câu trước, cái này là phải cái thống nhất chung. Okay. So there are questions about the different how to say different levels of impact. You go from moderate to significant. So what is the criteria, and how you can come with that different mark for different tier?
Yep. So basically, the way we came up with in our rubric what number goes to which of those 3 levels was using historic data and discussions with our emergency services and disaster management. So basically, over a 2 to 3 year period, we worked on our rubric, and would basically, with partnerships with them, would say this event we assessed as moderate, and they would say no, what we heard, it was much higher, it was a high event. So they basically told us what level they wanted their events to be, and then we shaped the rubric to make sure that it did fit those events.
I see. Ở đây thì tức là cách làm người ta là đầu tiên thì là phải dựa trên các cái cơ sở dữ liệu quá khứ của khí tượng, rồi thì của bên emergency và của bên disaster management. Đấy, tức là của bên thiên tai và của các cái đơn vị tham gia các cái tình huống khẩn cấp ấy. Đấy, thì để xác định các cái ngưỡng này. Tuy nhiên cái ngưỡng này cũng sẽ không cố định, mà 2-3 năm một lần thì họ lại họp lại với nhau để điều chỉnh. Đấy, thì ở đây đó chính là cái nói đến cái partnership. Và khi mà ví dụ như khi một cái sự kiện trong quá khứ đã xảy ra rồi, thì hai bên sau 2-3 năm ngồi lại với nhau thấy rằng là với cái trường hợp xảy ra tác động đã xảy ra như này, ví dụ bão ngần này, gió ngần này gây ra ngần này người thì chết, hoặc là huy động lực lượng ngần này, thì tôi phải xếp cái sự kiện này nó vào cái ví dụ vào cái significant, không phải moderate nữa. Đấy, thì cái đấy là cái mà cứ 2-3 năm họ lại rà soát lại một lần giữa các đơn vị trong khối phòng chống thiên tai để thống nhất lại các cái ngưỡng đấy và mô tả các cái tác động khác nhau cho từng cái lĩnh vực đấy. Thì đấy là cái căn cứ để họ sau này là khi đã có các bảng rồi thì họ cứ theo cái đấy mà họ đánh giá, nhưng mà 2-3 năm một lần thì họ lại cập nhật và trao đổi cập nhật. Rồi, các anh chị nào?
Thế lúc nãy có 2 cái bản tin, một bản tin gió, một bản tin rông. Bây giờ cái trường hợp một cái bản tin mà đa thiên tai thì các cái điểm nó sẽ tăng lên, đúng không? Trong cái bản tin, ví dụ như trong một bản tin đa thiên tai, ví dụ như kiểu bão.
Cái nào cao thì nó sẽ thường trước. Coi cái đấy nó nói gì.
Okay, câu hỏi được. So there's another question about the multi hazard. When we have more than one hazard happen in one place at the same time. So how can we consider that? I think we have also this question yesterday. So
yep. So because we use the same assessment no matter what the hazard is, if there's multiple together, then we're just assessing how those two will at the same area impact it. So if I just go back in my slides. So this one's the tropical cyclone, which obviously is made up of multiple hazards. Something like the damaging winds are what's responsible for the property damage. We won't get that much if it's just the rainfall. So it's the property damage is coming from the stronger winds, as is the delivery of services and utilities. But things like the main transport and is coming more from the flooding is the same thing. So we assess it as an event as a whole. So it's as one, often if there's multiple hazards in the same area, for example, if you're going for damaging winds and heavy rainfall because you've got thunderstorms, we just assess them as a combination of the two.
Okay, okay, got it. Ở đây thì tức là đấy, trong trường huống đa thiên tai thì họ sẽ phải xem xét thêm cái khả năng mà hai hay ba cái thiên tai này xảy ra đồng thời hay không, hay là nó là theo một trình tự cascade, hay là nó xảy ra theo đúng một khu vực hay không, hay là tùy. Thế còn ví dụ như cái mà thông thường khi xảy ra như thì họ sẽ phải xem xét cả hai, tất cả các thiên tai đấy. Ví dụ như bão là một cái ví dụ điển hình về đa thiên tai, theo vừa có gió mạnh vừa có mưa lớn. Thì đối với cả tài sản, cái nhà cửa thì đa số là bị phá hủy bởi gió. Đấy, thì họ sẽ đánh giá cái phần mà property kia thì chủ yếu là về gió. Nhưng còn ví dụ đối với cả giao thông hay là các hoạt động hàng ngày thì là cả mưa cả gió. Đấy, thì những cái đấy là họ sẽ đánh giá cụ thể luôn. Trong này là cũng mô tả các cái tác động kia là đều liên quan đến các thiên tai đấy. Đấy. Chứ là ví dụ nói tóm lại là khi mà xảy ra đa thiên tai là chúng ta sẽ phải xem xét đồng thời để đánh giá cái tác động này. Được ạ, anh chị có hỏi không? Yes, I think there are no more questions. You can keep going.
Excellent. I'll just change presentations to the next one.
Okay.
So hopefully you can see the new presentation now.
Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. So this is just looking at using various data sources to verify impact forecasting, because it is quite different to previously using just hazard data for forecasting, for verification. So I'll just basically be looking at what we've previously used to verify hazard forecasting, and the various sources we looked for that, and now looking more at verifying the impact forecasting, the structured approach, the partnerships you'll need, and other ways of getting information. And I'll just go through a bit of an example about how we pull it all together to actually verify it. So overall, verifying data, hazard data seems very simple. It should be, you've got a direct comparison of your forecast to your observation. Anything that you're observing, you should be able to verify pretty well. So there's a couple of images there for Australia, looking at the first top one is just looking at maximum temperatures. You've got rainfall and even flooding as well. But the problem we have is, especially in Australia, that we don't have the greatest of data networks. We have a lot of data in some areas of Australia, but you'll notice any parts of the central, we lose a lot of that just because we are a very large country and those areas are actually not that populated. So we do find that while it does seem like a very simple thing to do, it doesn't always work for us perfectly, and there's still a lot of data that we're missing. A lot of times we can't actually verify perfectly our forecasts. So the issues that we have when verifying it is from our official sources, our AWS, as mainly our AWS's, which is where we get most of our information, but it doesn't, of course, measure everything. We don't measure snow or hail size. So as soon as we've got hail from thunderstorms, we actually can't verify it using just our network of observations. Some data we're just going to have to verify from other sources we have, like radar imagery does work. And as mentioned, though, for us, the major issue has always been that data just isn't everywhere in Australia. And you can get an idea here of where our sort of observation networks are and where our radars are as well. So even taking into account something like radar coverage, we do find we have a bit of problems there. So other things that we can use, so there's unofficial reports that are not from us ourselves. So you've got weather on the web, which that's just there, is other people's data that they've got on information on, at this point, this one's just temperature. You've got things like social media though, looking at sort of rainfall amounts or hail pictures, webcams as well, and even you can look at things like transport data. We've got cars and trucks that actually permanently are sending that data back to places. So there's different ways that we can do it. Some of the things we've looked at is media channels more than anything else. Significant information we can find on media platforms, but it is very time intensive. There is a lot of information out there, but we do find that it's very hard to find the information easily. There are some things that make it easier. We've got very specific groups on Facebook or other social media platforms that very much like weather. So example of that is Who Got the Rain, which is an entire Facebook group of 61,000 people, which all they post is rainfall amounts that they have received around Australia. So it's dedicated and it's mainly for farmers, but very good if you need to find out some rainfall amounts in an area that you can't observe. And then you can look at things like doing Google searches for specific terms and in time frames. So we can search for information from official media platforms and so data out there. We can use Google to search for that and just specify the time and area that we care about. And then there's other partnerships that we could have. We've got emergency services, of course, which will generally give us pretty good information about what's happening on the ground. We do have a storm spotter network of people that have been taught what to look for and what to observe, will actually ring us. And of course, we've got other government agencies as well, including what's our Crisis Coordination Centre, which is the one that we partnered with for a lot of our forecasting. So here's an example of the Northern Territory roads, letting us know that they've been closed due to flooding. And even that one there is the tram letting me know that due to the extreme weather, which was heat, forecast tomorrow, that there would be already delays. So there was already an impact before it had happened, but due to the extreme heat, they'll always delay things like trams and trains. So we knew there was already going to be some travel delays. But the most important one is, of course, your partnerships, which will be the greatest source of information you can have. But we do find it can be hard to use in real time. This is an example from the bushfire season of the areas burnt at the end of last year. But by the time we'll generally get this, it's quite late. So we can't really use it in real time. It is very good for verification after an event, but not during an event to try and sort of either increase or decrease your forecast. But it is quite easy to access, and they generally will send it in a quite usable format for you as well. So this is just one that was looking at the building impact assessments that were done through the area. Obviously with bushfires, they're not going to do any of the impact assessments until it's safe to do so. And then, of course, as mentioned, your unofficial areas, which there is basically a trusted, as we call them, and not so trusted area. So for general media, looking at things like television, radio, print, generally trusted will have always sort of verified the accounts through there. So that's just an example of talking about how hot it was in Adelaide and the blackouts there. So that was obviously power outages through the area. And then, as mentioned, you've got social media, but it does need to be validated. You have to be careful with people reposting things that have already been done. We do find a lot of times we'll see images that were actually from weeks, if not months ago. So you have to be careful, and you generally have to get multiple accounts at once before you can use it in any sort of verification. And this is the sort of way that we used to do verification in what's called the Extreme Weather Desk, or EWD there, which was the section I was previously in. So we actually spend a significant amount of our day in the afternoons collating all observations, reports, inferred data, and any other sort of environmental factors, mainly looking at sort of the newest runs of our models for any hazards and impacts that may have occurred. We would search social media and other sources for reliable information. And we also verified our thunderstorm forecasts. All of this was used in something that is called PERM, which is our post-event report management, which is basically looking at our verification and when we actually do full reports for events. It was very time intensive though to find reliable information about events. And so we started to try and look at sort of quicker ways to do it, as we can't always spend hours looking through social media for any verification on events that did happen. So in ways that we did find that worked a bit better to find information was We have our own social media accounts, and generally people were nice enough to put their observations on it. So we have a national Facebook page, which people would often reply to, letting us know about the hazard or the impact for their area. So the person at the top here has let us know that they got 48 millimeters of rainfall and hail as well. And they were nice enough even to tell us the area that they were in. You still have to manually search through the comments. They often don't include the time or exact location, but we do find if we've put a post up about severe thunderstorms, the information they're going to give us is to do with the severe thunderstorms. We did find also that multiple events can get combined into one. So someone might be talking about thunderstorms from 3 days ago, or the rainfall that came from something else. And then, of course, as mentioned, we have other Facebook groups. We have a large amount of people in Australia that are storm chasers that have open groups that you can normally look at to find recent discussions on the storms and the sort of events that happen through there. And also we have, of course, Twitter, like everyone. We have regional accounts for that. So at least we know when we're getting replies, it's only for that specific state rather than the country as a whole. Often the replies do have observations in them, and you can also search for relevant hashtags through there, and you can change your location so you're not looking in, you know, across the world at the US or something. So it is a good way of getting a lot of information quickly about whether you saw wind damage, hail, something like that. But you have to be quite aware of confirmation bias, which is basically we only look for it if we expected it to happen. So it's a lot harder to verify missed events if you didn't even know that they occurred. So if they weren't within sort of your radar area and you didn't know there was a thunderstorm, it is very hard to use this method to verify. So you do want to get in the habit of however you gather your information to gather it whether an event happened or not, to make sure you are not falling into the trap of only confirming events you expected or warned for. I might just stop there so you can do some translation if you'd like.
Yes, thanks Grace. Đấy thì cô có nói về cái đánh giá ở đây thì có hai cái mảng, một là đánh giá khí tượng, hai là đánh giá cái tác động. Thế thì cái đánh giá khí tượng thì cô nói là cũng khá là đơn giản, cũng có làm từ lâu rồi, ví dụ đánh giá lượng mưa hay là nhiệt độ, độ ẩm, mực nước vân vân, chúng ta làm được. Và đặc biệt là các cái hệ thống quan trắc này có nhiều các cái đối tác có các quan trắc. Tuy nhiên thì cũng có một số cái mà chúng ta sẽ không quan trắc được, ví dụ như là kích thước hạt mưa đá, hạt đá chẳng hạn. Đấy, hay là một số khu vực thì có cái không có số liệu, cái data resolution nó kém. Đấy, cho nên là cũng là một cái khó khăn cho đánh giá. Tuy nhiên thì ngày nay thì còn có thêm các cái nguồn không chính thống, đặc biệt là các cái media, các cái kênh truyền hình truyền thông cũng như là các cái nhóm ở trên Facebook. Thì đấy là cái mà chúng ta có thể sử dụng để đánh giá các cái dự báo của chúng ta. Còn về đánh giá tác động thì nó cũng có hai nguồn, là một nguồn chính thống thì là qua các cái đơn vị về phòng chống thiên tai và các cái tình huống khẩn cấp, cũng như là các cái đơn vị về thuộc của nhà nước thì sẽ cái nguồn đáng tin cậy hơn. Còn về cái partnership và cái gọi là hợp tác ấy, thì cũng có thể khai thác tốt nếu mà chúng ta có cái hợp tác tốt và thống nhất với các cái format số liệu thì nó cũng sẽ tự động về các cái hệ thống của chúng ta và chúng ta có thể đánh giá được. Còn các cái nguồn mà không chính thống thì chính là các cái thông tin trên báo đài, rồi báo in, rồi thì các cái nhóm Facebook, ví dụ nhóm chuyên đi săn rông chẳng hạn, hay là các cái trên Twitter hoặc Instagram. Đấy, và ở Úc thì họ cũng có một cái Storm Spotter, cái phần mềm chuyên cho những người mà đi săn rông. Đấy. Thì hiện nay ở cơ quan khí tượng Úc có phát triển một cái gọi là cái EWD Daily Verification, tức là cái đánh giá sớm hàng ngày, tức là tổng hợp tất cả các thông tin từ các nguồn đấy thì họ sẽ đưa lên bản đồ xem là khu vực nào xảy ra thời tiết nguy hiểm gì. Đấy, cùng với đó là cái bản đồ dự báo về các cái thời tiết nguy hiểm đấy và cái thiệt hại. Đấy thì tuy nhiên cũng có thể sử dụng các kênh khác, ví dụ như là qua Facebook. Đấy, rồi thì Twitter, hoặc sử dụng các cái hashtag của trên Facebook để thống kê các cái thiệt hại. Tuy nhiên thì như cô nói là cái vấn đề ở đây thì là cái vấn đề về số liệu và cũng như là các cái sự trùng lặp các cái thông tin, hoặc là không có các cái thông tin cụ thể về thời gian và địa điểm. Đấy, nhiều khi chỉ có mỗi một hình ảnh thôi thì nó cũng khó cho cái việc mà đánh giá được cái dự báo. Okay, you can keep going. Grace?
Thank you. Then the other ways that we sort of looked at as well was during basically the idea of words in you can search by date through recent events. It's generally only good well after the event though, because you generally want to wait until you have enough data, and you're basically just looking for keywords and how many times someone mentioned them or people did mention them. And then you can sort of infer that if people are mentioning hail a lot, then there was a hail event through the area with probably more of an impact. As mentioned, always though, time intensive, and it's not always up to date, and yeah, better used well after the event. One of the things that we did find important is we couldn't always believe exactly what happened in the media, or sometimes the importance of realizing the difference between impacts and maybe the reports we're getting out of them, as things can change quite quickly. So this was from a year and a half ago. This was the report that came out in one of the newspapers in Queensland, talking about how farmers were so happy because it was finally raining in an area that had been on drought for a very long time. So that came out, but of course those people aren't on the ground. The area is now flooded and cut off, so we hadn't actually got that much information out, and they probably were very happy at the start of the event. But this is the report that we got a few days later, which basically said that due to the flooding, there'd been a huge amount of cattle death through that area, and basically they said that it had stopped being good rain 3 days ago, which is when this report came out. So it's really the importance of making sure you've got the impact on the actual from the ground, rather than just one that might have been inferred a little bit. So you do always have to be quite careful with those sort of ones. And if anyone's squeamish, look away now, because yeah, this is the images they basically sent us. So they had mass areas of cattle death, unfortunately. One of the ways we've tried to sort of streamline the process of getting a lot of these reports for events that are happening is through an app. So this was done with Monash University called WeatherX, which was created basically as an app where people can report events as they happen. So they can report the amount of, if there's been hail, flooding, wind damage or rain in their area, they can report it through there, and you've got a live feed of it, and you get can put images on it and observations as well. So it's a bit of an easier way to basically crowdsource your verification through there. And because you're looking for multiple events in the same area, you generally won't have as much of a problem with people just putting in incorrect observations. You're just looking for that sort of cluster through there. So that's one way that we have sort of looked to streamline a lot of this process. In terms of collating the data, currently we still manually find a lot of our observations and collate them on a date based on the day or event. We use the hazard observation for things like thunderstorm forecasts, and as well for things like environmental, and look at things like environmental factors. But for impact, we're collating mainly the impact information from people on the ground. So either whether that's through our partners or through social media or other media channels as well. So as always, more data is needed, but we actually don't have the same data sparsity problem that we have in hazard forecasting. Because the assumption is that if no one's reporting an impact, it's probably because one didn't occur. We have a lot of areas in Australia that, yes, we still do warnings for, but no one's actually around. So in terms of impact forecasting, we wouldn't actually be required to put them out there. But you do have to be careful sometimes that assuming that more reports means more impact. As a general rule, it should, but a lot of the times we find that we get the reports of the same impacts through the area and even the same damage as well. So it'll be multiple people that are talking about the tree that fell on one house, which may inflate it to look like it is a much larger event than it was. And so on a day-to-day basis, we fill in a verification log. We try and look at the same sources and always the same searches, so that no matter what the event is, we should have looked at the same information each day, and we just have basically a checklist that we go through to get this information using various social media and partnerships as well to get the information, and then we do an assessment like that. So you can see down the bottom of that image is the normal rubric, which one of my colleagues has filled in for the bushfires that was occurring. So there's a lot of red in that one. But that's the idea. We want to verify each event as they happen. At the moment, we focus on the more larger events. So generally, orange and reds are always verified. Yellows are verified as much as we can. And the greys, we don't have the time to verify them at the moment. And so in terms of moving from data to the actual verification, we found it's quite easy we've found ways to collate the data as best as we can, but actually moving that from just data to the full verification of the overall forecast has taken a lot more time. We've at least got the data so we can go back at some time and do the full verification. We have often multiple events happening in one day because we are looking at Australia as a whole, and even sometimes multiple events over the same. The same events are happening over multiple days, so we haven't worked out how to move from a day-by-day assessment to an event total and collating those two things. And often a lot of the data that we need will take a long time to do it, so we can't just do the verification from yesterday because some of that data won't be available for us for a while, which will of course impact the verification. We also do have our regional centres, so there's one in every state and territory, and they often have a lot more of the information as they are closest with the customer. So we do have to work with them to get as much of that as we can in one central place. So we have found that it is very hard for one section, which is the national one at the moment, to verify all hazards for the entire country. So we do break it up a little bit more that the states do have to do their own verification of at least the larger events. And that's where something called PERM, which is our post-event reporting management system, which is here. You can see, so basically we've said when an event happens, if anything hits that high margin, so if you got widespread damage to properties, which is high in our rubric, if any of them happen, they automatically have to start this process. They have to do a full assessment to let us know what the overall event was, whether it ended up being a moderate event, but just some things were higher than others. And that's fine. Otherwise, it actually triggers things like structural debriefs that they have to do. So we've embedded our impact assessment process within our actual post-event management as well. And then you have to do things like do your lessons learned, actions, and learn from that as well. And then basically we have a tally for the entire year of the events that happened throughout the year that were triggered PERM. So these will always be our higher impact ones. Some of them will still be moderate, but we basically do a overall assessment for the entire year. So this was from basically this financial year, though this one's only till the end of April. And as mentioned, this is all sort of after the event, and it's our way of making sure that all events have been categorized the same within the region. So they're all assessing the same thing and are making sure that they're all doing the same reports as needed. So some regions aren't doing reports for events where others might not. We wanted to make it a nationally consistent approach to it. As mentioned, it's any high impact on the community or an industry. If there was high impacts on our actual operations as well. So if we ended up being fatigued or anything, that will also trigger this process through there. And we found that overall it's actually quite useful because it does provide us with a database of impact information, and it is used for validation of our national hazard outlook. And I'll just pause there for a second.
Yes, thank you, Grace. Ở đây thì cô nói tiếp về cái phần mà đánh giá. Thì ở đây thì ngoài cái việc mà các cái thông tin đã về rồi chăng nữa thì chúng ta cũng có gặp rất là nhiều khó khăn khi mà đánh giá, bởi vì là còn do nguồn số liệu hoặc là về chậm hoặc về muộn hoặc là không có, bởi vì tính chính xác của các cái nguồn số liệu này. Và khi mà đánh giá trên phạm vi toàn quốc như thế, toàn nước Úc như thế, sẽ rất là mất thời gian, cho nên xu hướng của họ là gì, là các cái khu vực, các cái bang sẽ đánh giá riêng các cái thiên tai cho từng bang đấy, chia nhỏ các khu vực ra. Và ở Úc thì cũng có một cái hệ thống gọi là cái PERM, tức là Post Event Review Management, tức là sau mỗi một thiên tai nào sẽ phải rà soát lại từ công tác dự báo tùy cái cấp thiên tai, cái tác động cái cấp thấp nhất, lâu với cả là họ làm các cái đánh giá nó nhẹ đơn giản hơn. Còn các cái sự kiện mà có cái tác động lớn thì họ sẽ đánh giá đủ hết tất cả các cái lĩnh vực, kể cả các cái bản tin cảnh báo rồi thì các cái thiệt hại
rồi thì các cái bài học rút ra, rồi các cái khuyến cáo vân vân nó hợp phù hợp hay chưa, và từ đấy thì họ thành lập một cái database chung cho các cái thiên tai đấy, và họ thấy rằng là rất là hữu ích, bởi vì sau này nó còn giúp cho cái việc là cải thiện cái cơ sở dữ liệu để sau này đánh giá cái rủi ro do thiên tai gây ra. Okay, thank you, Grace. You can keep going.
Thanks. So with the PERM, as mentioned, we use the same impact assessment as we used before the event. So we are comparing the same thing together. So it's the same rubric as the National Hazard Outlook. It allows us to get a direct comparison. And as mentioned, it's a good trigger point for any further actions that may be required and lessons that we've learned from these events. So how we collate this all together and actually do the assessment is like the following. So basically we use the various sources that we have to do the impact assessment. So we're actually I'm just gonna quickly go through what was one of the impact assessments for in this case, it was the New South Wales and Victorian bushfires at the end of last year. So it occurred on New Year's Eve. There was a big flare-up day through there. So basically, we go through the assessment. So this is a news article talking about at least 2 people who were dead and fears for others, as well as multiple injuries that occurred through there. So that, of course, was a significant danger to life, with actually people, unfortunately, losing their lives. So that's sort of how we came up with that assessment for property. We got information from also from the media, but more importantly, we got the assessments from our fire agencies. So they started assessing how many houses were destroyed, damaged, or untouched. And so that's what actually started the 8th of November. So we just used the previous data minus and work out how much for each sort of day. We ended up with extreme damage for that day, with multiple towns quite badly impacted through there. In terms of delivery of services, unfortunately for us, there's a major line of communication between Victoria and New South Wales, which was impacted. So a lot of the south coast of New South Wales, which is a very highly populated area, had no communications through there. All of their towers went down through there as well, and there was multiple power outages through those areas as well, as the bushfires had impacted a lot of lines as well. Emergency services we got through our partnership with the Australian government, which confirmed the following resources had been deployed, which was over 2,000 firefighters, including interstate and international. We had international firefighters from both the US and Canada come to support us during those periods. So of course that was probably the most extreme we can get in terms of emergency services. Transport, we had many major roads between Victoria and New South Wales cut, with many towns unfortunately also cut out of the area. So it was pretty much a critical event through there, with major roads cut, and no one was getting sort of in or out through there. In terms of the daily activities, obviously those that did evacuate when they could, but we actually had over 5,000 people that ended up sheltering on a beach. At least in one of the towns. Of course, all areas, all schools and workplaces were closed, and yes, everyone pretty much that could had evacuated the entire area. So there was widespread, of course, disruption on any activity through there. Agriculture, luckily for us, it's not actually too huge of our agriculture area. It's much more sort of wildlife parks. So there was only some vineyards that were mainly impacted due to smoke more than anything else through there. So that was sort of localized damage through those areas. But you can see large areas being burnt. And in terms of land and vegetation, it was widespread and excessive through there, which you can easily see from that image. The population for us was mainly rural towns for those bushfires affected through there, getting close to the regional cities but not quite making it. Spatial exposure was a widespread multiple state event, and it lasted for well over 24 hours. And then just adding into the this was the first sort of major bushfire through the areas. We had them, but they'd previously been much further north. So there was no previous sort of significant events through there. But unfortunately for us, of course, this is New Year's Eve, so it was a very large travel period. Most people would have been heading those areas to those areas normally to get because that is a pretty big holiday sort of hotspot. So Overall, it ended up being an extreme event, which is what you would have expected with something this large. So that is how we sort of use all of our data sources to do a impact assessment after the event, using exactly the same rubric as we do before the event. And then using that,
Yes, so ở đây thì cô vừa nói trình bày lại một cái trường hợp mà người ta luôn làm cái gọi là post event verification, tức là sau một cái thiên tai thì người ta làm lại y hệt như cái bảng đánh giá tác động mà chúng ta đã làm khi mà chúng ta dự báo. Để cũng dựa vào các cái số liệu thu thập ở trên mạng xã hội, các cái bài báo, các cái thống kê thiệt hại, rồi số người chết, rồi thì số nhà bị cháy vân vân, rồi thì cái diện tích rừng, rồi ví dụ cái hình ảnh cái khói ở trên hình ảnh mây vệ tinh. Đấy, rồi thì cũng đánh giá lại toàn bộ các cái khu vực bị ảnh hưởng vân vân, và cũng như thời gian kéo dài, rồi thì cái tính đến cả cái việc của ngày 31 tháng 12, tức là cái ngày cuối của năm gọi là giao thừa ấy. Nên là cái ảnh hưởng của nó cũng lớn hơn rất nhiều so với cả các ngày thường. Đấy, thì tổng hợp lại tất cả những này thì cái cách làm của nó là y hệt như là khi mà chúng ta dự báo. Đấy, sau đấy chúng ta sẽ so sánh đánh giá lại cái dự báo của chúng ta là theo cách này. It's just a quick question, like in this case, when you do the analysis and warning, what is the impact number?
So when we did the forecast for this event?
Yes, for this event.
I think we had gone for an extreme event for this because we were expecting quite large bushfires, and the fact it was on New Year's Eve. But if I remember correctly, I think we're sitting at around 28, so we were a bit lower than they're verified as. But yes, I think we actually did forecast the extreme event.
Okay, I see. Yeah, 28. Thanks.
Yeah. So in terms of the preliminary verification that we've done, it's everything, but it was just what we've managed to do so far. We have 36 events that we had from PERM, which were done through the 2019-20 season. Though for ease, we are verifying impact against risk, so the same color. So for example, if we were forecasting a yellow event, it would equate to a moderate overall impact. That isn't exactly correct, but it is a lot easier for us to verify that because we don't have enough events yet to go into a probability part of the verification. The other issues that we have is we only really have a way of verifying an entire event against a one-day forecast. So we don't verify each day singularly. It's normally verified as an entire event, which unfortunately does mean that when we're doing a one-day forecast, it's not quite comparing the same things, but it is close. So generally, we will verify whatever day we forecast is the peak day, we will verify against the event. So we don't have no indication of how well we've done with the onset or clearance of any event, and we don't, and as mentioned, we are not quite comparing the right thing. We are comparing risk to impact instead of impact to impact, just because we don't have enough events to go to probability. And of course, we aren't verifying the lower end ones, those sort of grays and lower yellow ones that may not have been captured by PERM. We will at some point go back and do that. We just haven't had time to go through the full assessment for each event. And this is in terms of the actual verification we had from that season. So you can see here, I have included the day of the event, which is the during event, during the event. So if it was a multiple day forecast, how well we did actually throughout the event. Generally, we found that we would under forecast with greater lead times. That's probably just due to the fact that the probability will lower your overall risk. So we weren't too worried about that. We did find that we actually over forecast our yellow events, which is at moderate level after the first few days. But I do think that's probably because we were under forecasting the orange events. So they sort of balance out, if you will. Red and extreme events were pretty much found to be forecast perfectly on the day of, but we're still underdo it with greater lead time just because there is that sort of probability coming into it. It does mean that a little bit further and a little bit harder when we do see these events sort of happening. And as mentioned, there are limitations to the current way that we are doing the verification. We're only using the more extreme ones. We've still got confirmation bias, so we're not taking into account events that we forecast for and didn't eventuate, which we will need to look at as well. and we just don't have enough events yet to do a full proper assessment. And as mentioned, we're giving one rating for an entire hazard area, whereas realistically over a large enough area, there's probably a range of impacts. Some smaller areas will have a larger impact than others. We do just assess it as a whole, and that overall has been going pretty fine. But one thing we do note is that if a forecast was perfect and there was a necessary actions taken, the idea is, will there actually be an impact? So we do know that because we have a forecast that occurs, basically our warnings and forecasts create actions which should mitigate your impact, which does lead to action. So it is a bit of a round thing that happens where, because you forecast something, you'll probably mitigate your damage, which will affect your verification. If in a perfect world, you would just have to go back to verifying hazards and assuming that you're still going great. And one of the sort of examples of this is a tropical cyclone that happened in the Northern Territory. This was the original forecast for it a couple of days out. And you can see that area that says Alangula, which is that big island just near the Northern Territory. That's called Groot Island, and that was evacuated because of the event. It doesn't have a proper cyclone shelter there, so it was decided to, as quickly as possible, the entire. It didn't actually end up hitting Groot, but it did hit sort of Borroloola and the MacArthur River Mine area, so it actually missed Groot Island. But when we did the post-event report of it, there was a mention here that there was a large-scale evacuation of towns and communities. So we did wonder, one, did we actually cause more of a negative impact on the area of Groot Island? But more importantly, there's zero risk to life now because there's literally no one left. So we were interested to see how we are going to verify things in the future, because eventually, assuming that your mitigation works, that overall changes your impact.
Ok, thanks Grace. Ở cái phần cuối thì cô có nói về một số các cái tổng kết khi mà thực hiện cái PERM, đấy tức là họ làm có 36 sự kiện. Thì tuy nhiên thì cái này là ít cho nên là cũng chưa rút được nhiều, và mỗi cái sự kiện event thì người ta chỉ làm một cái dự báo, về một dự báo, đánh giá cho một dự báo cho cái ngày mạnh nhất thôi, cái peak day thôi. Thì chính vì thế cho nên là cái đánh giá nó cũng chưa được đầy đủ, vì cái đánh giá tác động nó mất thời gian hơn. Và cái thứ hai nữa là ở đây là đánh giá mới là đánh giá cái so sánh cái impact với cái impact, chưa tính đến cái xác suất. Là cái trục của chúng ta mới là đánh giá cái trục ngang, mà chưa đánh giá cái trục phản ứng. Rồi một số các cái hạn chế ở đây thì có thể kể đến như là chưa tính đến các cái sự kiện mà có cường độ trung bình. Rồi thì cũng khi mà cái sự kiện nó xảy ra rồi có dự báo cảnh báo, nhưng mà khi mà không có thiệt hại thì không có báo cáo về thì cũng không được đánh giá, và bị đánh giá là sai. Thì cũng giống như cái trường hợp mà cô lấy ví dụ cuối cùng là khi mà cái cơn bão Trevor gì đấy vào cái khu vực phía bắc của Northern Territory thì là toàn bộ ngư dân ở trên cái đảo, một cái đảo là phải sơ tán hết vào đất liền, bởi vì là đơn giản ở trong trên đảo là không có các cái shelter để tránh bão. Đấy, chính vì thế cho nên sau khi bão đi qua thì lại không có thiệt hại gì cả. Đấy, thì cái này thì nếu mà tính về cái ảnh hưởng trong cộng đồng, cái community impact ấy, thì lại gần như bằng không, mặc dù là đúng, mặc dù là dự báo đúng. Đấy, thì đấy là cái mà nó khó so với cả cái việc mà đánh giá thời tiết, đánh giá cái tác động thì nó sẽ có những cái khó riêng. Các anh chị xem có câu hỏi được không?
Nhưng mà em nghĩ là cái trường hợp này rồi thì mình đánh giá được và mình đã hành động đúng, nên là mình không bị gây thiệt hại gì nữa.
Nhưng mà khi mình đánh giá tác động impact ấy, thì nó lại tính đến là ví dụ khi mình nói rằng liêu ảnh hưởng rất lớn, đúng không? Ảnh hưởng rất lớn tức là có người chết, có thiệt hại về người, nhưng thực ra lại không có, thì thành ra mình lại là bị sai.
Hay là cũng hạn chế, cái hạn chế. Vì như khi mình đánh giá nó bào đấy, mình phải những cái nếu mà đánh giá tác động thì rất nhiều ngành được.
Thực ra đánh giá tác động thì nó tính từ số liệu quá khứ thôi.
Đấy là
không đánh giá dự báo tác động. Dự báo tác động thì mình cảnh báo tác động ở mức thấp hay cao, rất cao. Mình cảnh báo rất cao, nhưng mà thật ra hay xảy ra cái tác động, cái thiệt hại cuối cùng nó chỉ mức trung bình thôi chẳng hạn, thì mình bị sai.
Cái câu hỏi dài như là khi mà như bảo mình thường người ta cảnh báo thì rất nhiều trường hợp mình không phải di dời dân, như cái khi mà các action thì phải thực hiện, nếu mà thực hiện thì phải thì nghe cái tính pháp lý như thế nào là tỉnh ở trong này chưa, ví dụ như khi nếu trường tác động nó đúng ấy là làm sao, nhưng mà sai thì nó cả cái học hành động ấy thì như theo nếu cũng hoạt động ấy thì ảnh hưởng là để giả sử như xảy ra chết người hoặc là gì đó chịu trách nhiệm.
So there's a question from the floor that he wonder, for example, we warning a storm coming and do the evacuation for everyone, but finally there no strong wind or no storm come to that area. So who is responsible for that action, for that evacuation action?
For Australia, the evacuations are done by the Disaster Management and Emergency Services, so it is not our decision on whether actually it will be evacuated. It will always be the emergency services that makes the decision for the area. We can just give them the most up-to-date sort of advice on the level of the hazard and the most likely impacts we see there.
Nói là cái quyết định là do bên emergency và bên phòng thiên tai, chứ bên khí tượng thì cô không nắm được. Okay, I think there are no more questions. So thank you very much, Grace and Sean, for very informative lectures. So we are here very happy to learn a lot about what you have done and what you have shared with your experience in implementing the IBF in your country. So thank you very much. And maybe come back to Sam.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Lam, for putting everything together. Thanks, Grace. That was just excellent, Grace. And participants, as you would know, Grace has done a lot of work on this. She even made videos, which are available to you. And that website is going to remain alive for as long as for years. And therefore, you'll always be able to look at the presentation as well as the video. So thanks again, Grace, for that. You also responded to yesterday's question. There was a question concerning how to approach the multi-hazard way of doing a table, and you did that in an excellent way. I would also like to thank the participants for your very lively participation. It encourages us in WMO. After having done all this, we see that it's having an effect. We like that. I'd like to thank Paul and Sean also for all the work you've done. And now, concerning this afternoon, we are going to have a self-directed session. And during the session, we have a YouTube to be watched that was prepared by Barbados. I will ask Sean to take 2 minutes to just say what it is about. And then there are some simulations for wind and rain hazard, and also some reading to do. I'll also ask Paul to also say 1 or 2 things about it. And then from there, then we'll proceed to the next session. So may I ask Sean to just say something about the video?
Sure, Sam. So the video that has been posted on the page provides an example of a scenario similar to what you'd have gone through with Paul today as it related to a potential event. But in this particular case, it's not necessarily a real event, it's more geared towards raising awareness of impact-based forecasting use as it relates to the weather forecast. So that it's really meant to be a awareness-raising video, which demonstrates the concept, and hopefully you should be able to use it to build on the experiences and knowledge that has been transferred today. So if you have any queries after watching the video, please feel free to send them through, or if you have any recommendations, as it may not necessarily be perfect, there is room for improvement. So I will also look forward to any feedback that you may be able to provide. Thanks a lot. Over.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe you want to say something about the video to the.
Cái video này các anh chị xem một cái tình huống giả định cũng như là cách mà chúng ta sẽ làm các cái dự báo tác động ở Caribe. Thì nó các anh chị sẽ xem ở trong đấy thì sẽ thấy là các từng bước người ta làm như thế nào.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Paul. You have 2 minutes to just introduce the simulations.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. So, similar to the case study we went through today, we have developed a simulation module where you go through the process of looking at both wind hazard and rain hazard, and you have to go through the process of what is the risk and potential impact, and what kind of messaging that you want to provide to the public. Interactive module, so that if you have choices of what to select, and if you don't get it correct on the first try, you can go back and go through it again and see and learn through that process. So it's it'll give you some more practice on going through the whole process of looking at the different hazards and coming up with appropriate response to the public. So yeah, I look forward to discussing how it went tomorrow. We reconvene.
Còn về cái phần ba cái video, ba cái simulation ấy, thì nó sẽ về hai cái simulation, một cái về wind, một cái về rain. Thì mọi người sẽ xem cái cách mà người ta thực hiện cái IBF. Trong cái phần đầu thì chúng ta sẽ có một cái là communicating risk, tức là sẽ giúp chúng ta là cách thức để chúng ta soạn thảo các cái bản tin, các cái thông điệp để gửi đến cộng đồng như thế nào, để cho nó đúng là cái gọi là impact based forecast. Thì cái phần mà simulation thì các anh chị có thể xem đi xem lại nhiều lần, và cũng để học được cái cách mà chúng ta thực hiện cái dự báo tác động với các cái giả thiết, các cái giả định khác nhau.
Yes, Sam.
Okay, thank you. Just to add, if you have, during this self-directed session, if you have any questions, please put the questions on the link that we have provided on the website.
Và nếu anh chị đã có câu hỏi gì thì chúng ta có thể post câu hỏi theo đường link ở trên website ấy.
Okay, now concerning tomorrow, so that we can be ready for tomorrow. So we have a question and answer session that will be conducted by Paul, and then we have a team that